She did not cry when her father grabbed her arm in front of the whole town and shoved her toward a stranger. She did not flinch when the crowd laughed. She did not beg when her own flesh and blood pointed at a quiet, dusty rancher standing at the edge of Miller's General Store and said, "Loud enough for God and every soul in Red Hollow to hear." Take the girl? Nobody else will. Abigail Carter straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and looked that stranger dead in the eye. And she said the words that would change everything. If this story already has your heart beating faster, do us a favor right now, hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what happens next between Abigail Carter and Nathaniel Brooks is something this valley and every woman who has ever been told she wasn't enough will never forget. The morning it happened, Abigail had already been awake for 4 hours. She had milked the 2 remaining goats before sunrise, hauled water from the creek because the pump had rusted through again, and started a fire in the cook stove with wood she'd split herself the evening before, even though the blisters on her palms had not yet healed from the last time. She had done all of this quietly, carefully, the way she did everything, without complaint, without announcement, without expecting a single word of thanks. Because in the Carter household, gratitude was a currency her father had stopped spending years ago. Eugene Carter was not a cruel man by nature. He had been once a decent farmer with a sharp eye for soil and a strong back for labor. But the years had worn him hollow. 3 failed harvests. A dead wife. Debts that multiplied the way weeds did, quietly, steadily, until they swallowed everything worth growing. And somewhere in the ruin of all those losses, Eugene had stopped seeing his daughter as a person and started seeing her as a problem he didn't know how to solve. Abigail was 26 years old, broad-shouldered and full-figured. With dark brown hair she kept braided tight because loose hair had no business near a cook fire. Her hands were calloused, her boots were worn through at the left heel. She owned 2 dresses, both faded, and a wool coat that had been her mother's and still smelled faintly of lavender if she pressed her face into the collar on cold mornings. She was not what the women in Red Hollow called pretty. She had heard that all her life in 100 different ways. Some people said it plainly, like it was useful information. Some said it with pity, which was worse. And some said it the way Mabel Hutchins said it, with a bright, terrible smile, like it was a joke everyone was in on except Abigail. But Abigail had learned a long time ago that the world's opinion of her body had very little to do with what her body was actually capable of doing. And her body was capable of quite a lot. She had the stew going by the time her father came downstairs. She heard his boots on the steps, heavy, uneven, the shuffling gait of a man who hadn't slept well in years. He came into the kitchen, looked at the pot on the stove, and said nothing. He poured himself a cup of coffee, pulled on his coat, and said, "I need you to come into town with me today." "What for?" she asked, stirring the stew. "Got business to settle." He didn't look at her. "Be ready in an hour." She should have asked more questions. Later, she would think about that. She would replay that conversation 1,000 times in the months that followed and wonder what would have happened if she'd pressed harder, if she'd said, "What kind of business, Pa? What exactly are you planning to settle?" But she didn't ask, because she had spent her whole life learning not to. She put on the better of her 2 dresses, pinned her braid, pulled on her mother's coat, and climbed up beside her father on the wagon seat. The morning was cool and gray, the kind of Montana sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain or simply threatened to. The road into Red Hollow was rutted and familiar. Abigail watched the land past the brown hills, the dry creek bed, the 3-legged fence posts that nobody had gotten around to fixing, and she felt the particular kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. The kind that pressed down on your chest. Red Hollow was not a large town. It had a general store, a livery, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, a saloon that nobody respectable admitted to visiting, and a post office run by a woman named Dorothea Peel, who knew everyone's business before they did. On a Saturday morning, the main street had enough foot traffic to feel lively. Ranchers and their wives, cowboys loading supplies, children running between wagon wheels while their mothers pretended not to see. Eugene Carter drove the wagon straight to Miller's General Store, tied off the horse, and climbed down without offering Abigail a hand. She climbed down herself, the way she always did, and followed him to the steps where a small group of men had gathered. That was when she saw him. He was standing slightly apart from the others, a tall man, lean in the way that came from hard work rather than deprivation, with a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same stone as the mountains behind the town. He wore a plain coat dusty at the shoulders, and a hat that had seen better decades. His boots were serviceable but not new. Nothing about him announced itself. He was the kind of man your eyes slid past at first, until you looked again and realized you couldn't quite look away. He was watching the group of men with dark, patient eyes, saying nothing, contributing nothing to their conversation. Just watching. Abigail did not know his name yet. She would learn it soon enough. Her father walked up to that group of men with a particular set of his shoulders that she recognized as forced confidence, the bravado of a man who owed money and intended to solve it by talking fast. "Nathaniel," Eugene said, and the quiet man looked up. "I come to make good on what we discussed." The quiet man, Nathaniel, studied her father for a moment. "That's so." It was not a question, it was the kind of statement that made space for the other person to say something foolish, and Eugene Carter walked right into it. "I ain't got the cash," her father said. "You know that. The harvest didn't come in. But I got something else." Nathaniel said nothing, and Eugene Carter turned and looked at Abigail. She felt it before she understood it, a cold drop of dread that started at the base of her skull and moved slowly down her spine. She looked at her father's face. He wasn't looking at her the way a father looks at a daughter. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a thing he's decided to use. "Take the girl," Eugene said. "Nobody else will." The words landed in the middle of that group of men like a stone dropped in still water, and for one terrible half-second there was silence. Then someone laughed. It started with the man nearest to Eugene, a heavy-set farmer named Cale Briggs, who had never in Abigail's living memory passed up an opportunity to be unkind. Cale laughed, and then the man beside him laughed, and then the laughter spread the way bad things spread in small towns fast, and without anyone stopping to think whether they ought to. "Take her," said Cale Briggs, loud enough for the women on the other side of the street to hear. "Lord, Nathaniel, you want that? She'd eat you out of house and home before winter." More laughter. Abigail stood very still. She had learned that too, stillness. The way you went very quiet and very careful when the world turned its cruelty in your direction. The way you pulled everything inward so that there was nothing left on the surface for anyone to grab onto. She had gotten very good at it. She had practiced it her whole life in this town, in this body, with this face that never matched what people thought a woman's face ought to be. But something was happening inside her that stillness could not contain. It was not grief exactly, it was something hotter. Something that had been building for years behind a dam she had built with patience and silence, and the constant, grinding effort of proving herself useful enough to keep around. And standing on those steps, with her father's words still hanging in the air and Cale Briggs's laughter cutting through her like a January wind, Abigail felt that dam begin to crack. She turned her eyes to Nathaniel Brooks. He was not laughing. He was looking at her with those dark, patient eyes, not with pity, not with amusement, not with the particular combination of discomfort and contempt that she was used to seeing on men's faces when they looked at her. He was looking at her the way you look at something you are trying to understand. Carefully, seriously, like what he found there mattered. "I apologize for my father," Abigail said, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. Eugene turned on her. "Abigail." "No, sir." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You will not offer me like I'm something to be rid of. Not in front of these people. Not in front of anyone." The laughter around them went uncertain. Briggs shifted his weight. A few people on the far side of the street had stopped to watch. Nathaniel Brooks took one step forward. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't need to fight for space. "Your father and I had a business arrangement that went sideways. That ain't on you." He paused, But if you're looking for honest work, I've got a ranch that needs managing, and not enough hands to do it. Abigail looked at him. What kind of work? Cooking, mainly. Some animal care. The kind of work that takes patience and good sense. Another pause. I pay fair wages. You'd have your own quarters. And nobody on my property talks to my people the way these men are talking right now. Cale Briggs snorted. Your people, Lord Nathaniel, you ain't even got a proper bunkhouse. Nathaniel didn't look at Cale. He kept his eyes on Abigail. That's an offer, ma'am. You do with it what you want. Abigail's heart was beating very hard. She was aware of her father beside her, of the crowd that had gathered, of the weight of every eye on the street pressing down on her like a physical thing. She was aware of her worn boots and her faded dress and the way she took up more space than people thought a woman ought to. And she was aware of this man, this quiet, unremarkable-looking man, standing in the middle of all this ugliness, and offering her something she had never once been offered in this town. A choice that wasn't wrapped in shame. I am not asking anyone to save me, Abigail said, looking Nathaniel Brooks square in the eye. I am asking for honest work and a fair chance. That's all I'm offering, he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stepped forward. The walk from her father's side to Nathaniel's felt like the longest walk she had ever taken. She heard someone on the street make a low, amused comment. She heard her father say something she didn't listen to. She heard Cale Briggs start up with another remark and stop abruptly when Nathaniel turned and looked at him with those dark, quiet eyes that had somehow, in the space of 10 minutes, learned to be the most serious eyes in Red Hollow. She stopped beside Nathaniel and turned to face the crowd. Well, she said, because someone had to say something. Lead the way, Mr. Brooks. He nodded once, like a man who kept his word and didn't need to announce it. Ma'am, they walked to his wagon. He offered his hand to help her up. She took it, not because she couldn't manage the step herself, but because it was offered without hesitation and without the slight grimace that men sometimes couldn't quite hide when her weight shifted onto them. He helped her up the same way he would help anyone up. Like it was simply what you did. She settled onto the wagon seat and looked straight ahead while he climbed up beside her and gathered the reins. Behind them, she could hear the town already turning her departure into a story. She could hear the shape of it forming the laughter, the commentary, the particular small-town pleasure of watching someone else's humiliation and calling it entertainment. She did not look back. The wagon rolled north out of Red Hollow, toward the hills, and Abigail Carter made a silent promise to herself that she would never give that town another reason to laugh at her expense. She did not yet know the ranch they were driving toward. She did not know its size or its history, or the secrets it held buried in its ledger books and its land titles and the careful, deliberate choices of the man sitting beside her. She did not know that in the weeks to come, she would find her footing in ways she never imagined. That she would discover capabilities in herself that Red Hollow had never given her the space to develop. That the man beside her, this dusty, spoken, unhurried man, was not what he appeared to be, and neither was the life he was offering. But right now, on the wagon seat with the gray Montana sky opening up above them and the town falling away behind her, Abigail Carter was simply aware of one thing. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was going somewhere instead of being left behind. Nathaniel Brooks drove in silence for a mile before he spoke. You cook? He asked. I've been feeding 4 ranch hands and my father for 6 years, she said. With whatever I could stretch. You know cattle. I know goats. I reckon cattle aren't so different in what they need. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. They're considerably bigger. I'm aware of size, she said flatly. There was a beat of silence. Then he said, I imagine you are. She cut a look at him. His face was straight, but there was something at the corner of his mouth, not mockery. Something drier than that. Something that acknowledged what she had said without making a production of it. My son is 15, he said after a moment. He's going through a hard patch. Doesn't talk. What happened? His mother passed. 3 years back. I'm sorry. My daughter is 9. She used to talk enough for both of them. She's gotten quieter too. Abigail looked out at the land rolling past them, the brown grass, the long shadows of afternoon moving across the hills. "How long since you had a woman in the house?" 3 years, he said. "And the ranch hands?" "Good workers. Not much for domestic arrangement." "Meaning the kitchen is a disaster." "Meaning," he said carefully, "the kitchen has seen better days." "And the animage. That's not the same as tending." "No," he said, "it ain't." They came over a rise, and Abigail saw it for the first time, the Brooks Ranch, spread out below them in the shallow bowl of a valley, the main house large and solid, the barns and outbuildings beyond it, the pastures running wide to the east, and the try-line marking the creek to the west. It was not a small ranch. Even from this distance she could see it was not a small ranch. She did not say anything about that. She filed it away in the back of her mind, the way she filed away things that didn't quite add up, and she looked at the house and the barns and the pastures, and she started mentally calculating what needed doing. "Those pastures been rotated?" she asked. Nathaniel glanced at her. "Why, the grass on the east side looks tired. If you've been running cattle on it all season, it needs resting." He was quiet for a beat. "You can see that from here?" "I grew up watching my father make the same mistake," she said. "You put worn-out land back to work before it's ready. It fails you faster than you think." He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice had shifted slightly, not softer exactly, but more attentive. Like he was recalibrating something. "We haven't rotated," he said. "Not this season. You'll want to," she said, "before the ground freezes." He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the valley. "All right, Miss Carter," he said. "We'll rotate." The wagon rolled down toward the ranch, and Abigail Carter looked at the house that was going to be her home, not by her choosing and not on her terms, and not in any way she would have scripted, and she thought, "You are not going to fold here. You have folded before, in rooms smaller than this, in moments smaller than this. You have made yourself small enough to disappear, and it has never once saved you. So you are going to do something different. You are going to take up your full amount of space in this place and see what happens." The wagon stopped in front of the house. A boy came out of the barn, tall, dark-haired, with his father's jaw and a closed expression that had the specific quality of a teenager who had decided the world had already shown him enough of itself and found it wanting. He stopped when he saw Abigail. His eyes moved over her once, assessing, and then moved to his father. "Who's she?" he said. "This is Miss Carter," Nathaniel said, climbing down. "She'll be managing the household. We don't need help." "I've decided we do, Eli." "I said we—" "And I heard you," Nathaniel said, calm and final. "Miss Carter, this is my son Elijah." Abigail climbed down from the wagon again without assistant, Eli having made no move to offer it, and looked at the boy. He was furious at something that predated her arrival. She could see that. The anger was old and settled into him, stiff leather. "Elijah," she said. "I've heard that name. It's a strong one." He looked at her with the particular suspicion of a 15-year-old who has been complimented before and found it wanting. "Don't need it to be strong." "No," she agreed. "You don't need a name to be strong. The name just has to fit the person carrying it." She let that sit for a moment, then said, "Is there a good place to leave my bag? I'd like to see the kitchen before I start supper." Eli blinked. He had clearly been prepared for several responses to his hostility, and civil practicality had not been among them. Nathaniel said, "I'll show you inside." The kitchen was exactly what she expected. It was functional in the way that a room managed entirely by people who viewed cooking as a necessary inconvenience tends to be functional, everything in approximately the right place, nothing in good order. A layer of grease on the stovetop that spoke of meals assembled quickly and cleaned up minimally. The larder was stocked, at least. She moved through it, opening doors, checking supplies, running a finger along a shelf and examining what came away on her fingertip. "It's not as bad as I feared," she said, which was charitable. "The men eat well enough," Nathaniel said. "Eating enough and eating well are different things." She turned and looked at him. "I'll need a full accounting of what you have in stores. And I want to see the animals tomorrow morning. You'll be busy with the kitchen." "Mr. Brooks," she said, You hired me because you needed someone with patience and good sense. The patience I have. The good sense is telling me that animals that aren't properly tended will cost you more before winter than a morning of my time. She held his gaze. Let me see the animals tomorrow. He studied her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were doing that careful, attentive thing again, recalibrating. All right, he said. Morning then. She nodded and turned back to the larder. Behind her, she heard him move toward the door and then stop. Miss Carter. She looked back. What you said today, he said. In town, I am not asking anyone to save me, he paused. I respect that. She held his gaze. I wasn't saying it for your benefit, Mr. Brooks. That's why I respect it. He left. Abigail turned back to the larder and stood for a moment in the quiet kitchen with her hand on the shelf, breathing slowly, steadying herself. Because the truth was, she had been saying it for her own benefit. She had been saying it the way you say things out loud that you need to believe, because saying them in your head has never quite been enough. She had said it because she needed to hear her own voice say it in a place where other people could hear. She was not asking to be saved. She was not here because someone had taken pity on her. She was here because she had chosen to be, with the only agency she'd had available to her on a day when every other door had been shut. And that, she told herself, was the beginning of something. She did not know yet what kind of beginning. By the time supper was ready that evening, she had reorganized the kitchen, identified 3 problems with the larder's moisture management, made a mental list of 6 things that needed addressing in the first week, and produced a meal from what she found on the shelves that made 2 of the ranch hands stop mid-bite and look at each other. Lord, said the one named Pete, a weathered man of about 50 with a permanent squint. Where'd this come from? The kitchen, Abigail said, setting down a second pan. Same place it always comes from. Beg your pardon, miss, but it didn't come from this kitchen before tonight. Then we're making improvements, she said. She began filling bowls. Eli watched her from his end of the table. He had not said a word since the doorstep. He ate, eyes down, jaw working steadily, and when he finished, he pushed back his chair. It's good, he said quietly, to no one in particular. Then he left the table. Nathaniel, sitting at the head, said nothing. But when Abigail glanced at him, she caught the expression that crossed his face, quick, unguarded, gone almost before she could name it. It looked like relief. That first evening, when the dishes were washed and the kitchen was quiet and the hands had gone to the bunkhouse and the children were in their rooms, Abigail sat at the kitchen table alone for a moment before she went to bed. The house was still around her. Outside the window, the Montana sky had gone to black and full of stars, the kind of sky you never saw in the middle of a town because the darkness there was never complete enough. She sat and she thought about the morning, about her father's hand on her arm, about the crowd laughing, about the word nobody else will, and the way it had landed on her like something she was supposed to carry from now on. She thought about stepping forward on those steps and what it had cost her. And she thought about what she had found on the other side of that step, not rescue, not salvation, not the arms of some romantic fiction. Just a wagon seat, a quiet drive north, a kitchen that needed organizing, and a boy who ate her cooking without saying it until he was already halfway out the door. That's enough, she told herself. Right now, tonight, that is enough. She went upstairs to the small room that was hers now, clean, spare, nothing in it but a bed and a washstand and a window that looked north toward the dark hills, and she sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet. She did not know yet what this place was going to ask of her. She did not know what she was going to discover in its ledger books and its land titles, or what it was going to mean when she found it. She did not know that the man downstairs, this ordinary-looking man with his dusty coat and his patient eyes, was the furthest thing from ordinary that this valley contained. She only knew that tomorrow morning she was going to see those animals. And the day after that, she was going to find out what else needed fixing. And she was going to keep going, one day at a time, the way she had always kept going, not because someone handed her a path, but because she was the kind of woman who made one. She lay down on the bed, fully dressed, and was asleep in minutes. Outside, the Montana night settled over the Brooks Ranch, over the pastures and the barns and the quiet house, and somewhere in those dark hills, the creek ran on, and the land held its secrets. And the story of Abigail Carter and Nathaniel Brooks was only just beginning. The morning came hard and cold, the way Montana mornings did in late September, and Abigail was already at the barn before the sun had fully cleared the hills. She had been awake since 4. Not from anxiety, she was past anxiety. She had used up most of her anxiety reserves on the wagon ride north yesterday and had nothing left for it now. She was awake because her mind had been working through the night, the way it always did when she was in a new place, cataloging, organizing, building lists. The kitchen had given her plenty to work with. She suspected the barn would give her more. She pushed the barn door open and stepped inside. The smell hit her first, not bad, not neglected, but not right either. There was something underneath the normal smell of hay and animal warmth that her nose recognized before her brain caught up with it. She moved down the row of stalls, touching gate latches, looking at water troughs. Running her hand along the neck of the first horse, she came to a big roan gelding, who turned his head and looked at her with one dark liquid eye. "Easy," she said softly. "I'm not here to bother you." The gelding's ear swiveled. She ran her hand down his neck along his shoulder and felt him flinch. She stopped, pressed her palm flat against his side just behind the shoulder. "Prestig, that hurts," she said quietly. "Not to anyone." Just naming it. She moved on to the next stall and the next. By the time she reached the 4th horse, a gray mare with a dull coat and hollow eyes, she had already counted 3 animals showing signs of a problem she recognized from her father's farm. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing that announced itself loudly. It was the kind of problem that crept in quietly and got expensive before anyone thought to look for it. She heard boots behind her. "You're up early." She didn't turn around. "So are you." Nathaniel came to stand beside her at the mare's stall. He looked at the horse, then at Abigail. "Something wrong?" "These animals have a mineral deficiency," she said. "The gray one worst of all. You see how her coat's sitting? And the way she's standing with her weight off that left front." She finally looked at him. "How long has she been doing that?" He frowned. "A few weeks, maybe." "And nobody said anything?" "Pete mentioned she seemed off." "We figured she was just what?" He didn't finish the sentence. "Mr. Brooks," Abigail said carefully, "a horse that won't bear weight on a leg for a few weeks isn't just off. She's been trying to tell you something for a few weeks." She looked back at the mare. "You have any salt blocks in here?" "Course, where?" He pointed toward the far end of the barn. She walked to it, looked at the salt block, crouched down and examined it. Straightened up. "This one's old. The mineral content's gone out of it. They've been licking at it for nothing." She turned back to him. "You'll need new mineral blocks. And I'd add a supplement to the mare's feed until she comes right. If you don't have sulfur on hand, the mercantile in town carries it." Nathaniel was looking at her the way he had on the wagon yesterday, that careful recalibrating look. Like he was updating something. "I'll send Pete to town," he said. "Send him today. She's been patient about it, but she won't be much longer." "All right." She started back down the row of stalls, making mental notes. He walked beside her, and she noticed he didn't fill the silence with unnecessary words. That was something. Most men, when a woman was telling them something they should have caught themselves, filled the discomfort with noise. Nathaniel Brooks let the discomfort sit, and she respected. "The roan gelding has a sore spot behind his left shoulder," she said as they walked. "Something rubbed him raw under the saddle pad. You'll want to check the pad itself, might be a seam gone wrong. Eli uses that horse. Then Eli might want to know about it before he saddles up today." Nathaniel was quiet for a step. He won't take well to being told. "I'm not planning to tell him," Abigail said. "I'm planning to show him." She found Eli at the breakfast table, already eating, or rather, already staring at a plate of food that Pete had apparently assembled, which looked like it had been prepared by a man who considered cooking a chore to be finished as fast as possible. Eli looked up when she came in, then back down at his plate. Leave it, he said before she could speak. Leave what? Whatever you're about to say. I don't need managing. I wasn't going to manage you, Abigail said, setting her coat on the hook by the door and moving to the stove. I was going to make a proper breakfast and mention that the roan has a sore on his left shoulder that needs a day off from the saddle. The roan? You've been using him hard. He's a working horse. He's a horse with a raw spot the size of my fist, she said. You use him today, he's going to go from sore to injured. That saddle pad needs checking. Eli pushed back from the table. Not storming out, she could see him recalibrating, the same way his father had done in the barn. Which shoulder? Left. Just behind the crease. He went out without another word. She heard him cross the yard. She began making breakfast. When he came back 20 minutes later, she was plating eggs and she didn't look up. He sat down at the table and was quiet for a moment. It was the seam, he said finally. It usually is. He okay? He will be if you rest him. She set a plate in front of Eli. I'd give him 2 days. He looked at the plate, he looked at her. Something moved across his face, not quite gratitude, not quite acknowledgement. Something on the way to both of those things that hadn't quite gotten there yet. All right, he said. He ate everything on the plate. She noticed that, and said nothing about it. The first week at the Brooks Ranch settled into a rhythm that Abigail built herself, day by day, the way you build anything that needs to last, with attention and consistency, and the willingness to start over when something didn't work. She reorganized the kitchen on day 1 and the larder on day 2. On day 3, she identified the problem with the water management in the south pasture and mentioned it to Nathaniel over supper, laying out what she'd observed in the kind of plain, factual language she used when she wanted to be taken seriously. He listened. He asked 2 questions. He sent 2 hands to look at the drainage the next morning. The hands, Pete, and a younger man named Cord, who couldn't have been older than 22 and had the eager, watchful quality of someone trying to prove himself, came back reporting exactly what she had described. Pete told this to Nathaniel. Nathaniel told it to Abigail. She said, "Good," and went back to the bread she was kneading. She heard Pete say to Cord, outside the kitchen window, "Where'd she come from, that woman?" And Cord said, "Red Hollow. Her father gave her away on the steps of Miller's General Store." And Pete said after a pause, "Man's a damn fool." She kept kneading the bread. Word spread the way word always spread in small ranches, through the bunkhouse, through mealtimes, through the particular kind of attention that men pay to someone who turns out to be more capable than expected. By the end of the first week, the hands weren't just eating at the table. They were lingering after meals. Pete had started asking about his horse's feet with the same mild, embarrassed sheepishness of a man realizing he'd been missing something obvious. Cord had started coming to the kitchen with small questions that were really just excuses to be in a space that felt, for the first time, like it had warmth in it. Nathaniel noticed. She could see him noticing. He came to the kitchen doorway more than strictly necessary, standing in it with his coffee cup, ostensibly looking at something outside, actually watching his men come back to life at the table. He didn't say anything about it. Neither did she. But on the 9th day, she found Clara. Nathaniel's daughter was 9 years old and small for her age, with her father's dark eyes and a quality of stillness that was too old for her face. Abigail had seen her at meals, had said good morning and received quiet nods in return, had noticed the way Clara watched everything from the corners of rooms without being part of anything. She had not pushed. She had learned that you couldn't push a child into trust any more than you could push a horse into calm. She found Clara in the barn that afternoon, sitting cross-legged in the straw outside the gray mare's stall, talking to the horse in a very quiet voice. Abigail stopped in the doorway and listened. "I know it hurts," Clara was saying. "I know. But she's fixing you. I watched her this morning. She knows what she's doing, I think. She talks to you like you're a real thing and not just a horse." A pause. "Papa talks to you too, but he does it when he thinks nobody's watching." Abigail stood very still. "I don't know if she's going to stay," Clara said. "People don't usually stay. The last 2 women Pop tried to hire both left after a week. One said the ranch was too far from town. The other one said. The other one said it wasn't a real household because there wasn't a real woman running it. Another pause. I think that was mean. Abigail stepped inside then, deliberately making her boots hurt on the barn floor so she wouldn't be caught eavesdropping. Clara looked up startled and then settled when she saw who it was. She's looking better, Abigail said, nodding at the mare. Clara looked at the horse. You think so? She's bearing weight on that foot again. See how she's standing? Abigail came and crouched down beside Clara in the straw, a process that was more complicated with her frame than she made it look, but she didn't call attention to it. 2 more days with the supplement, and she'll be back to herself. Clara watched the mare. She talks to me, she said after a moment. Horses do, Abigail said. You just have to learn their language. What is their language? Mostly it's in how they stand, where they put their weight, whether their eyes are soft or hard, whether their ears are up or back. Abigail pointed. See how her ear just tilted toward your voice? That's a saying she knows you. She's comfortable. Clara stared at the mare's ear. Then she looked at Abigail. Did you learn that from someone? My mother, Abigail said, before she passed. Clara was quiet for a moment. My mother passed too. I know, I'm sorry. Do you miss yours? Abigail looked at the mare. Every day, she said. But less like a wound and more like a direction after a while. Like she's still pointing me somewhere. Clara thought about this. Where is she pointing you, right now? Abigail glanced at the girl. I think she might be pointing me here. Clara looked at her for a long moment with those 2 old dark eyes. Then she turned back to the horse and was quiet, but the quality of the quiet had changed. It had opened up a little. It had the particular texture of a space that has been entered carefully by someone who knew to take their shoes off at the door. That evening, Clara came to the kitchen and asked if she could help with supper. Abigail handed her a wooden spoon without making a ceremony of it. The gravy needs watching, she said. Don't let it catch on the bottom. Clara watched the gravy with the focused intensity of a child who has been given something real to do and doesn't intend to mess it up. When Nathaniel came in and saw his daughter standing at the stove, something happened in his face that Abigail looked away from, because it was private. And that was when the trouble started. She did not know it was trouble at first. She knew it was something she had felt it on the edge of things since the second day, a faint wrongness she couldn't name, like a smell you can't quite locate. She had attributed it to the ordinary resistance of a new place. Strange hands, strange rhythms, the particular social calculus of a small community deciding where you fit. But on the 10th day, something happened that she couldn't attribute to ordinariness. She was in the larder taking stock when she heard 2 voices in the kitchen, Pete and Cord, and a third voice she didn't recognize. She went still and listened, the way her body had learned to go still and listen over years of being in rooms where she wasn't quite welcome. Word is Carter sold her off like livestock, the stranger's voice said. It had a light, comfortable quality, the voice of a man used to being found charming. Her own father. Right on the steps of Miller's. That's about right, Pete said. Ain't our business, though. Sure it ain't, the stranger said. Just interesting is all. Nathaniel's the one who took her in. Makes you wonder what he's getting out of it. Cord's voice, flat and young, she manages the household. That's what she's here for. Right, a pause. She cook as good as they say? Better, Pete said. Another pause leisurely. And Nathaniel's happy with the arrangement. You'll have to ask him. Oh, I will. Just thought you boys might have some insight. The voice went lighter, easier, the way voices do when they're about to say something they know isn't quite decent. Man takes in a woman nobody wanted, gives her a roof and a salary that's a charity case, boys. You gotta wonder how long before she starts thinking she's earned more than that. The larder was very quiet. Abigail's hand was flat on the shelf. She was breathing carefully. That's enough, Pete said, and his voice had gone short and hard. You got business with Nathaniel, go find him. A beat of silence. The stranger's boots on the kitchen floor, the door opening and closing. Then Cord said under his breath, "Who was that?" Pete said, "Trouble." Abigail stood in the larder for another moment. Then she straightened up, picked up her inventory list, and walked out into the kitchen, as if she had heard nothing. Pete looked at her. She looked at him. "Who was that?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "Man named Callum Wade," he said. "He's been sniffing around this property for 2 years. What does want? Land. Same as most men who come around wearing that kind of smile." Pete set down his coffee cup. "He works for a land company out of Helena. They've been trying to buy up valley properties, mostly the ones with owners who don't know what they've got, or don't have the resources to fight for it." Abigail looked at the closed kitchen door. "Does Nathaniel know he was here?" "He'll know by supper," Pete said. She nodded. She went back to her inventory. But her mind had shifted, the way it did when something slid into place beside something else, and the combination made a shape she didn't like. A land company. A man who came into other people's kitchens and called a woman a charity case with that easy, comfortable voice. A ranch that was bigger than it appeared. She thought about the pastures, their size, their condition, the way they ran all the way to the tree line and then kept going. She thought about the land titles she'd seen stacked in the study when she'd walked past the open door, more of them than a small, struggling operation would need. She thought about the way Nathaniel dressed, deliberately plain. The way he talked about the ranch modestly, carefully. The way he never quite agreed when the hands joked about their wages being barely worth it. She filed all of it away. She kept her face neutral and her movements efficient, and she thought, something here is not adding up. But she did not yet have all the pieces. She had Callum Wade. That evening she watched Nathaniel's face when Pete told him Wade had been in the kitchen. It was a small shift, a tightening around the eyes, a stillness in his jaw that hadn't been there before. He said, "When?" And Pete told him, and Nathaniel said he say what he wanted. And Pete said he'd come to see you directly. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "He will," he said finally. "He always does. You want me to tell him you're not available?" "That just delays it." Nathaniel picked up his coffee and looked at the table. "Let him come." Abigail was at the stove and she did not look at him, but she listened to every word and the spaces between them. There was something in the way Nathaniel spoke about Callum Wade, not fear exactly, but wariness. The wariness of a man who has been playing a long game and knows another player has just moved onto the board. She wanted to ask. Not that night. But Wade came the next afternoon, riding up the road on a horse that cost more than most men in this valley made in a year. Abigail saw him from the kitchen window, tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who wore his confidence like a coat that had been fitted specifically for him. He was younger than she'd expected from his voice. Maybe 35, dark-haired, clean-shaved, with the kind of face that people wanted to trust. She went out onto the porch. He stopped his horse when he saw her. Took off his hat with the automatic grace of a man who has practiced being charming long enough that it no longer requires thought. "Ma'am," he said. His eyes moved over her, not the way most men's eyes moved over her, dismissive and swift. Wade's eyes were calculating in a way that was almost worse. She was being assessed, filed, categorized for potential usefulness. "Mr. Brooks is in the north pasture," Abigail said. "He'll be back at supper." "I'm happy to wait," Wade said. He was already looking past her at the house. "The bunkhouse is out back," she said. "Pete can get you some water." He looked back at her with that easy, fitted smile. "I usually wait in the main house when I visit Nathaniel." "Then today will be a little different," Abigail said pleasantly. She did not step back from the doorway. Wade studied her for a moment. "You're Carter's girl," he said. I'm Miss Carter," she said. "And I manage this household, which means you'll wait in the bunkhouse or you'll come back at supper." "Your choice, Mr. Wade." The smile stayed on his face, but something behind it shifted. He was recalculating the same way Nathaniel did, but where Nathaniel's recalculation had opened him up, Wade's closed something down. Narrowed something. "Fair enough," he said. He put his hat back on, easy and unhurried. "I'll come back at supper." He turned the horse. Then he stopped and looked back at her. You're not what I expected, he said. Most people say that, she replied. He rode around toward the bunkhouse. She went back inside and found Eli in the hallway, having apparently heard every word. He's been coming here since before Ma died, Eli said. His jaw was tight. He's after the land. I know, Abigail said. He gets Pa talking, and Pa won't tell him no outright, and Wade takes that for a maybe. Does he get your father talking often? Eli's eyes went flat. He paused. Pa's too decent to him. He thinks if he's decent enough, Wade will understand he's not selling and go away. And Wade doesn't go away. Wade never goes away. She looked at the boy, this closed, furious 15-year-old who knew more about this situation than anyone had given him credit for. Then we'll need a different strategy, she said. Eli stared at her. What kind of strategy? She walked back toward the kitchen. Let me think on it. When Nathaniel came in from the north pasture that evening, smelling of dust and cattle, and the particular exhaustion of a man who has been working his land since before daylight, Abigail had supper ready, and Wade was already at the table, talking to Cord with that easy, confident voice, making himself at home in a way that was so natural it was almost impossible to object to. Nathaniel saw Wade and stopped for just a half-second in the doorway. Callum, he said. Nathaniel. Wade stood, extended his hand, smiled that fitted smile. I hope you don't mind. Your housekeeper kindly allowed me to wait. Abigail set a platter on the table. That's not quite what happened, she said mildly, without looking at either of them. Wade glanced at her. Of course. My memory gets loose after a long ride. He sat back down. His eyes, when they settled on Nathaniel, were warm and attentive. I just wanted to touch base. The company is moving on a new survey of the valley, and there are some developments I thought you'd want to know about. I'm sure, Nathaniel said. He sat. He picked up his fork. The Granger property sold last week, Wade said, helping himself to the bread without being invited. And the Halverson place is in negotiations. The valley's changing, Nathaniel. Smart men are making decisions now, before the change happens to them instead of for them. Nathaniel ate. He did not respond immediately. That was his way, the silence that made space for other people to say too much. But this time, Abigail could see something in the set of his shoulders. He was tired, not from the work. From this. I ain't selling, Nathaniel said. I understand that, Wade said, as if he didn't. I'm not here to pressure you. Just to keep you informed. That's kind. Of course. Wade took a bite of bread, chewed with satisfaction, looked at the food on the table. Lord, lady of the house? He glanced at Abigail. Miss Carter manages the household, Nathaniel said. Right. Wade's eyes moved to Abigail with that calculating warmth. Eugene Carter's daughter. I know your father, Miss Carter. Good man, even if he's had a hard run. She looked at him. My father is many things, she said. I wouldn't put good at the top of the list. There was a beat of silence around the table. Wade's smile widened because he was the kind of man who took directness as an invitation. Honest, he said, like it was a compliment and a demerit at once. I can work with honest. Then you'll appreciate this, Abigail said. Mr. Brooks isn't selling. He said it plainly, and he meant it. I think we can skip the next several visits where you come back with new angles and save everyone the trouble. The table was very quiet. Nathaniel looked at her. It was a brief look, unreadable on the surface. But underneath the surface, it was the look of a man who has just watched someone say out loud a thing he has been wanting to say for 2 years. Eli at the end of the table had gone very still. Wade looked at Abigail. The fitted smile was still in place, but the eyes behind it had gone harder. More precise. I appreciate plain speaking, he said. I really do. He set down the bread. But these are complicated matters, Miss Carter. Business arrangements. Land law. Things that take some understanding of the bigger picture. I understand land, she said. I understand water rights and soil management, and the kind of damage that happens to a valley when one company gets a stranglehold on it. I grew up on a farm that my father lost piece by piece because he didn't know what he had until it was gone. She met Wade's eyes directly. Mr. Brooks knows what he has, and he's not selling." Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork and smiled and said, "Well, that's a conversation for another day." He finished supper and left before dark, polite and unhurried, the way men leave when they know they'll be back. Abigail watched him ride out from the porch. Behind her, the door opened and Nathaniel came and stood beside her. They were quiet for a moment, both watching the road. "You didn't have to do that," Nathaniel said. "I know," she said. "He'll come that too." Nathaniel was quiet. "Then you're not afraid of him." "I've met men who use charm the way other men use fists," Abigail said. "Wood's version is prettier, but it's the same thing." She heard Nathaniel exhale slow, like something releasing. "Most people in this valley think he's just being neighborly." "Most people in this valley thought my father was just being practical," she said. "Doesn't make it true." He turned his head and looked at her in the fading light. And she looked back at him, and for a moment something moved between them that was not quite anything she had a name for. It was not attraction, not yet, or rather, it was attraction the way a ground-level current is before it becomes lightning. Quiet and foundational and doing its work underground. She looked away first. "Supper dishes need clearing," she said, and went back inside. She did not sleep well that night. She lay in the small room with its north-facing window and thought about Callum Wade and the Granger property and the Halverson place and the survey and the way Wade had looked at this house, not at its walls but through them, at what was behind them. At the land. She thought about Nathaniel's careful modesty. The plainness of everything he wore, everything he said, the deliberate way he made himself unremarkable. She had thought it was simply his nature. She was beginning to think it might be something more intentional than that. She thought about the land titles stacked in the study. She thought about the size of the pastures. She thought about the way Eli had said, "He's after the land." Not a farm's worth of land, valley land. She stared at the ceiling and she thought, what exactly is this place? And she thought, why does a man who can dress himself well choose not to? And she thought, Callum Wade is coming for something specific. He always comes for something specific. And whatever that something is, it is bigger than a struggling rancher's modest holdings. She fell asleep finally in the early hours, with the question still turning in the dark behind her eyes, and she dreamed of land wide, rolling, impossibly large, stretching out in every direction under a sky that went on forever. She woke with the particular feeling of a woman who has almost figured something out. Almost, but soon she found it on a Tuesday. 3 weeks into her time at the Brooks Ranch, Abigail had developed the kind of quiet authority over the household that didn't need to announce itself. The kitchen ran clean and efficient, the hands ate better than they had in years, and everyone knew it. The animals were improving. The gray mare was bearing full weight again. Even Eli had stopped leaving the table the moment he finished eating. He lingered now, sometimes for 10 or 15 minutes, not quite participating in conversation but no longer actively fleeing it. Clara had become her shadow. Not in a clinging way, the girl was too self-contained for that, but in the way of someone who had found a frequency they could tune to and didn't want to lose the signal. She came to the kitchen every afternoon. She asked questions. Good questions, the kind that made Abigail think before she answered. Nathaniel watched all of this from a careful distance. He was present, more present than Abigail suspected he'd been in years, but he kept himself at the edge of things, like a man who wasn't sure yet whether he was allowed to step into the warmth he could feel from where he was standing. She noticed. She said nothing. She was reorganizing the study. That was how it started, not with any intention of snooping, but with the plain practical need of a woman who had been told the household accounts were somewhere in that room and had been unable to locate them because the room was in the kind of disorder that accumulates when a man is competent at his work and catastrophically disorganized about his paperwork. She had asked Nathaniel about it twice. Both times he had said he would get to it. Both times he hadn't. So on a Tuesday afternoon when he was in the far north pasture and the children were occupied and the hands were at their work, she went into the study and began sorting. She was not looking for anything in particular. She found it anyway. It was in the third drawer of the white oak desk, under a layer of ordinary correspondence letters from suppliers, notes from the bank in Helena, maintenance records for the barns. She almost filed it without reading it. But the paper was different from the others, heavier, formal, folded in thirds the way legal documents were folded, and when she opened it, she saw the heading first. Montana, Office of Land Registry, Certificate of Title. She read it. Then she read it again. Then she stood very still for a long moment with the paper in her hands and the study quiet around her, and she thought, this cannot be right. But it was right. She spread the document flat on the desk, and she read it carefully, word by word, the way her mother had taught her to read anything that mattered, slowly, with full attention, without assuming she knew what it was going to say before it said it. What it said, precise, emotional language of a legal registration, is this: Nathaniel James Brooks, owner of record, 7,460 acres. Red Hollow Valley, Montana Territory, 7,000 acres. She set that document down and picked up the next one. Another title. An adjacent parcel, 1,800 acres, water rights included, registered to the same name. She set that one down and reached back into the drawer and pulled out another, and another. And when she had them all spread across the desk, she counted parcels until her hand was shaking slightly, and the number she arrived at did not match anything she had understood to be true about this place. Nathaniel Brooks did not own a modest, struggling ranch. Nathaniel Brooks owned the valley, not a piece of it. Not most of it. The valley, the creek, the high ground to the north, the timber rights on the eastern ridge, the water source that fed every farm and homestead for 15 miles. All of it, registered legal, entirely. The total acreage she calculated, standing there at his desk with her hand still trembling slightly from something that was not quite anger and not quite grief but had the texture of both, was somewhere north of 12,000 acres. She thought of the wagon ride north from Red Hollow. The way the land had opened up around them, the way she had thought absently, this ranch is not small. She thought of Callum Wade at the supper table, talking about the changing valley, the new survey, the smart men making decisions. And the way Nathaniel had sat there in his plain coat and his working man's silence and said, "I ain't selling," like it was a modest thing. She thought of every person in Red Hollow who had ever said the name Nathaniel Brooks in that particular tone, that mix of mild contempt and mild pity that towns reserve for the man they have decided is harmless. The poorest rancher in the valley. Decent enough fellow, nothing much to him. She thought of her father. Take the girl, nobody else will. And the crowd laughing because everyone knew Nathaniel Brooks was the bottom of the barrel, the last resort, the man you offered the unwanted things to, because even he couldn't do worse. Her jaw was tight. She realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly. She was not angry at the money. She had been poor enough for long enough that money itself didn't make her feel anything in particular. What she felt was something harder to name, the particular violation of having walked into a situation carrying all her shame openly, like a wound she couldn't cover. While the man beside her had kept his cards so close to his chest that she had never even known there was a game being played. She had thought she understood the terms of this arrangement. She had been wrong. She put the documents back in the drawer. She straightened the desk. She finished the organizing she had come in to do, working with steady automatic hands while her mind turned the situation over and over, the way you turn a stone to find what's living underneath it. She did not confront him that night. She thought about it, the words were right there, fully formed, ready to come out. But she sat at supper and she watched Nathaniel helping Clara with her fork grip, watched him listen to Pete's rundown of the day's work with that quiet, focused attention, and she made herself wait. Not because she was afraid of the conversation, because she had learned a long time ago that the most important conversations deserve to happen when you had all your pieces and knew what you were really asking. She didn't have all her pieces yet. She found the next piece 3 days later. She had been in the habit of rising early enough to have a full hour in the kitchen before anyone else was awake. That hour was hers, quiet and private, the one part of the day that hadn't been shaped by anyone else's needs. She used it to think, to plan, to sit with the questions that didn't have easy answers. That morning, she was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee when she heard the front door open, quiet and careful, the way someone moves when they're trying not to wake the house. She didn't move. She heard boots in the hallway. She heard the study door open. 20 minutes later, it closed again. The footsteps came past the kitchen. She said, "Early for paperwork." The footsteps stopped. Nathaniel appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was fully dressed, hat in hand, the kind of carefully assembled expression on his face that told her he was deciding something quickly. He said, "Coffee's hot," she said. "You look like you've been up for a while." He came in and poured himself a cup. He stood at the counter rather than sitting, which meant he wasn't planning on a long conversation. She filed that. "Going somewhere?" "Helena," he said. "Got business. What kind?" He was quiet for a moment. "Land business." She looked at her coffee cup. "Wade's company," she said. It wasn't a question. His stillness changed quality. "Why do you say that?" "Because Wade's been here twice in 3 weeks, and every time he leaves, you look like a man carrying a stone he's been carrying for a while, and is starting to feel the weight of it." She lifted her eyes. "What's he doing, Nathaniel?" It was the first time she had used his given name. Neither of them acknowledged it, but it landed in the room. He pulled out a chair and sat down. That told her the conversation was longer than he'd planned. He turned the coffee cup in his hands, the way he did when he was thinking something through. "He's filing a competing claim," he said finally. "On the Northern Ridge parcels." She was quiet. "Can he do that?" "He's arguing a surveying error in the original registration." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "It ain't a strong argument, but it's enough to tie things up in territorial court for a year. Maybe 2. And while it's tied up, I can't sell that timber or use those water rights for expansion. Which means the Halverson property to the east, which I've been trying to acquire, because it's the piece that connects my 2 northern parcels, stays out of reach." She thought about that. And if the Halverson property stays out of reach long enough? "Wade's company buys it," he said, "and then they own the corridor between my northern and southern parcels. And then I'm not managing this valley anymore, they are." The kitchen was very quiet. "He's been planning this," she said. "For 2 years," Nathaniel said, "at least." She looked at him. "Then why haven't you told anyone? Why aren't she stopped?" She thought about the plain coat and the worn boots and the dusty hat and the careful ordinariness of the man across from her. "You've been hiding," she said. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "I've been careful. That's the same thing." He set down the coffee cup. "When my wife was alive," he said slowly, "we had a different kind of life. People knew what we had, and they treated us accordingly." He paused. "After she died, I had 2 lawyers try to take the estate on behalf of creditors that didn't exist. I had a man try to marry my daughter, she was 6 years old, claiming an arrangement with my father-in-law that never happened. I had neighbors I'd known for 15 years suddenly needing favors I couldn't afford to give." He looked at the table. "I decided I would rather people see nothing worth taking." Abigail was very still. "And it worked," he said. "For 3 years it worked. Nobody bothered me. My children were safe." Wade started sniffing around, but he had no idea what he was actually looking at. He paused. "And then made a spectacle of me on the steps of Miller's General Store," she finished. "Made everyone in Red Hollow look at me," he said quietly. "Including Wade." She sat with that for a moment. It landed with the particular weight of an explanation that is true and also insufficient. She understood the logic of it. She understood the 3 years of careful invisibility that preceded it, and the very reasonable fear that had built it. And she understood that on the day her father had grabbed her arm and held her up in front of that crowd like something to be disposed of, he had also, without knowing it, put a spotlight on a man who had spent 3 years building a life in shadow. "You didn't have to take me in," she said. "No," he agreed. "You could have just walked away from the steps. I could have." "Why didn't you?" He looked at her for a long moment. And then he said something she hadn't expected. Because you said I am not asking anyone to save me, and every other woman I'd ever seen in that kind of situation either begged or folded. And I thought whoever she is, that kind of spine is hard to come by. He picked up his coffee cup again. Also, your father owed me $40 and I had a ranch that needed a cook. She stared at him. Then slowly she laughed. It surprised when the laugh came up from somewhere below her sternum, genuine and involuntary, the kind of laugh that happens when something is actually funny rather than performed. It changed her face completely. She felt it happen and didn't try to stop it. Nathaniel was looking at her with something new in his expression. Something that had not been there before, or had been there and carefully managed. She stopped laughing. $40, she said. He owed it for 2 seasons of water rights use, Nathaniel said. I was never going to see it, so I'm $40. You're considerably more than $40, he said. It came out quieter than he'd apparently intended, because he looked away immediately after and picked up his hat from the table. I need to get to Helena. Wait, she stopped. The survey error that Wade is claiming, she said. Is there documentation, original survey records? Should be in the Territorial Archive in Helena. Is that where you're going? To find them? He hesitated, just a half second, but she caught it. That's part of it. What's the other part? He didn't answer right away. Nathaniel. She put his name down plainly. They put down a card in a serious game. If you're riding to Helena to make some kind of deal with Wade's company, because you think that's the only way out of this, I need to know. The silence stretched. It's not a deal, he said finally. It's a concession, a small one. The northwest corner 30 acres, no water, no timber. Worthless to me, if it gets Wade off the legal challenge. It won't, she said. You don't know that. I know men like Wade, she said. You give them 30 acres, they'll file for 60 next month and make it look like you're the one being unreasonable when you refuse. She leaned forward. You cannot negotiate with someone who has decided to take from you. You can only stop them. He looked at her with those dark, patient eyes. And how do you stop them? You stop hiding, she said. The words fell into the kitchen like a stone into still water. Nathaniel was very quiet. You have been the invisible man in this valley for 3 years, Abigail said, and she kept her voice level and her eyes on his face. You know what that's gotten you? A land company that thinks you're an easy mark. A town that uses your name as a punchline. A 15-year-old boy who is furious at the world because his father won't stand up in it. She paused. And a woman who walked onto your property carrying her whole life in a worn-out bag because you were the last resort. His jaw worked. I'm not saying that to wound you, she said. I'm so because I have been invisible too. I know exactly what it costs. And I know that it does not keep you safe. It just makes it easier for other people to decide who you are. The kitchen was so quiet she could hear the fire in the stove. Then Eli's voice came from the doorway. Neither of them had heard him come downstairs. She's right, Eli said. Nathaniel turned and looked at his son. Eli was standing in the hallway in his socks, hair sleep-wild, jaw set in that stubborn angle that was purely his father's. He had clearly been listening for a while and had reached a point where he could not stand not saying it. She's right, Pa, he said again. You keep being invisible, and all that happens is Wade gets to be the loud one. And in this valley, the loud one wins. Nathaniel looked at his son for a long moment. Then he looked at Abigail. She said nothing. She had said what she had to say. He picked up his hat and turned it in his hands once. Twice. A man sorting through something that had a lot of layers. She watched him work through it, the 3 years of careful habit, the fear that was not cowardice but genuine protective strategy, the cost of maintaining it against what it was clearly costing him in other ways. If I stop hiding, he said finally, Wade knows what he's actually after. Wade already knows, Abigail said. That's why he's filing the legal challenge. He's done the survey. He knows the size of it. You've been invisible to the town, Nathaniel. You have not been invisible to the man who's been paying someone to count your acres for 2 years. He was still. He knows, she said again, quietly. The question is whether the town does. The implications settled over the kitchen like weather. If Red Hollow knew the truth of what Nathaniel Brooks held, if the valley's own people understood what was at stake, the calculation changed entirely. Wade's legal maneuver depended on a quiet target, a man who handled things privately, who wouldn't want the attention, who could be pressured in back rooms and courthouse corridors without the public ever looking twice. But a man the valley knew and respected, that was a different matter. Nathaniel set his hat on his head. "I need to think on this," he said. "Think on it on the way to Helena," Abigail said. "But don't make any concessions while you're thinking." He looked at her. "You're telling me how to handle my own affairs." "Yes," she said simply. "I am. You can ignore me if you want." He almost smiled. Almost. It moved at the corner of his mouth and was gone. He walked out the door. She heard his horse a few minutes later heading south toward the main road. Eli appeared fully in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. "Is he going to do it?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "He's stubborn." "So are you," she said. "It's not always a flaw." He considered that with the particular expression of a teenager encountering information he's not sure whether to accept. Then he said, "What's for breakfast?" She got up and went to the stove. But she was thinking about the land titles in the drawer. She was thinking about 12,000 acres and a man who had dressed like he owned nothing. She was thinking about Wade and the survey and the legal challenge and the Halverson property sitting on the east side like the final piece of a trap being assembled. And she was thinking about something else, something that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the day she had noticed the south pasture drainage problem. Since the day she had walked the creek line to the east and noticed how the water moved, and where it pooled, and what it did to the soil on either side of it. She had been paying attention to this land since the day she arrived. Not because she'd meant to, because she couldn't not. The land spoke to her the way it had spoken to her mother, the way it spoke to anyone who had grown up on a farm and learned early that the ground under your feet was telling you something if you had the patience to listen. And there was something the ground had been telling her for 2 weeks that she hadn't yet fully understood. Something about water, something about the eastern ridge and the way the drainage ran after the last rain, and the particular quality of the soil in the low ground near the property line that separated the Brooks Ranch from the Halverson place. She set the pan on the stove and she stood there with the fire going under it, and she turned that piece of information over in her mind, slow and careful, the way you turn something fragile. And then, with a quietness that felt like something dropping into place, she understood what she was looking at. She understood what the land had been trying to tell her. And she understood that what was under that low ground on the eastern edge was not just important to the Halverson property negotiation. It was important to the whole valley. She stood at the stove for a long time, her hand on the pan, the fire going under it, not moving. Then she said to no one in particular, to the kitchen and the quiet house and the morning outside the window, "Oh." Eli looked up from the table. "What?" She looked at him. Her mind was moving fast now, faster than she usually allowed it in front of other people, assembling pieces and testing their fit and finding them solid. "How well do you know the eastern property line?" she said. "The ground near the Halverson fence." Eli's brow furrowed. "I've ridden it. The low ground. Past the cottonwoods." "Yeah, I know it. It's boggy after rain. Pa always said it was just poor drainage." "It's not poor drainage," Abigail said. She turned back to the stove. Her voice was very even. "Eli, when your father gets back from Helena, remind me that I need to show him something." "What something?" She cracked eggs into the pan. "Something Wade doesn't know is there," she said. "And something that changes everything." The egg sizzled. The morning light came through the kitchen window. And Abigail Carter stood at the stove of a ranch she was beginning to understand was nothing like what it appeared, and she felt something she had not felt in longer than she could clearly remember. Not safety, not belonging, not the warm arrival of finally being somewhere right. Something better than all of those things. She felt like she was in the middle of something that mattered. And she was exactly the right person to be in the middle of it. Nathaniel came back from Helena 2 days later, and Abigail knew from the sound of his horse in the yard that something had gone wrong. She had learned his rhythms by then, the particular pace of a man returning from a good day versus a hard one, the way his boots sounded on the porch steps when he was carrying something heavier than tiredness. She was at the kitchen window when he rode in, and she watched him dismount and stand for a moment with his hand on the horse's neck, not moving. The way a man stands when he is deciding how to carry news into a house where people are depending on him. She had the coffee ready when he came through the door. He sat down at the kitchen table without taking his hat off, which told her everything. "Tell me," she said. He looked at the coffee cup. "Wade's company filed the competing claim 2 days before I got there," he said. "Not just on the northwest corner. On 3 northern parcels." She sat down across from him. "Which parcels? The Ridge Timber, the High Creek rights, and the eastern approach." He finally took his hat off and set it on the table. "He didn't file on the parcels I thought he was interested in. He filed on the ones that connect to the Halverson property." She went very still. "He already knows about the Halverson corridor. He knows about it, and he knows why it matters, and he's got a surveyor in the territorial office who filed the challenge 2 days before I arrived." Nathaniel's jaw was tight. "That wasn't coincidence." "No," she said. "It wasn't." She thought about Callum Wade sitting at the supper table, eating her bread with that easy, well-fitted comfort of a man who always knew more than the room he was sitting in. She thought about his eyes moving through the walls of the house, calculating. "He has someone watching this property." Nathaniel looked at her. "He knew you were going to Helena," she said. "He filed before you could contest it in person." "The kitchen was very quiet," Nathaniel said. It came out low and hard. She had thought it, too. She hadn't wanted to say it. The young hand with the eager, watchful quality, too watchful. She had thought more than once, without letting the thought finish itself. "I don't know that," she said carefully. "I do," he said. And from the flatness in his voice, she understood that he had been carrying this suspicion longer than Helena, and had just had it confirmed by something he'd seen or heard on the road. "Man rode out 2 nights before I left. I thought he was visiting family." "He doesn't have family within 50 miles. She absorbed this. "Did you speak to him?" "Don't," she said. "Not until we're ready." He ready for what? She stood up and went to the kitchen window. She had been waiting for Nathaniel to come home before she said this out loud to anyone, because saying it out loud made it real, and real things required courage she wanted to be fully assembled before she used it. "When you were in Helena," she said, "did you go to the creek?" "What creek?" "The Territorial Waterway Survey Office." "Did you check the survey records for the Lower Eastern Creek line, specifically the section that runs along the Halverson property boundary?" He frowned. "That's an odd thing to ask. Did you?" "No. I was focused on the land title challenge." She turned from the window and looked at him. "Nathaniel, I need to show you something. Not today, it's too late in the day. Tomorrow morning. I need you to ride the eastern property line with me, all the way to the Halverson fence, and I need you to look at the ground in the low section past the cottonwoods." He studied her face. "Abigail, what did you find?" She had not told him about the land titles in the study. She had been waiting for the right moment, and this was not quite it, but it was close enough that she could feel the weight of it pressing on the conversation. She made a decision. "Before I show you the land," she said, "I have to tell you something. And I need you to let me finish before you respond." His expression was unreadable. "All right. I organized the study," she said. 3 weeks ago. The household accounts were in there, or I thought they were, and you'd said you'd get to it and you hadn't." She paused. "I found the land titles." The kitchen went very, very quiet. "How many of them?" he said. It was not a question. "All of them," she said. "I didn't count every parcel." "But I counted enough." He was looking at the table. His jaw had done the tightening thing. His hand on the coffee cup had gone still. "I know what you own," she said. "I know the size of it. And I know that every person in Red Hollow who laughed at me on those steps, every person who called you the poorest rancher in the valley, I know they were wrong. And I know you let them be wrong on purpose." She paused. "And I need you to understand that I am not angry about the money." He looked up. "I am angry," she said, "that I walked into that town in a faded dress carrying 26 years of people telling me I wasn't worth anything, and I stood on those steps in front of everyone I've ever known. And I was offered to you like a consolation prize. And you stood there and let them believe it." She held his gaze. "Not because you were cruel. I know you weren't. But because the disguise was more important than the truth." The silence that followed was the realest silence she had ever sat inside of. Nathaniel's face had gone through several things while she talked. She had watched them move through him, the caught-out look, the defensive tightening, and then something else. Something that went deeper than both of those. Something that looked underneath everything else, like shame. "You're right," he said. She had not expected him to say it that directly. "You're right," he said again, quieter. "And I don't have an excuse that holds water. I have reasons. But you just told me the difference between reasons and excuses a few days ago, whether you meant to or not." He was looking at her steadily now, the way he did when he was not managing his expression. "When I saw you on those steps when your father said what he said, I thought, I'll give her a place and honest work and she'll be all right. I didn't think about what it cost you to accept it the way everyone was watching." "No," she said, "you didn't. I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. 2 long moments. She had built a lot of things in her life: competence, patience, the ability to endure, but forgiveness was different from those. Forgiveness required that you actually let something change inside you, and she was only beginning to understand what needed changing. "I believe you," she said finally, "and I think we can have the rest of that conversation later. Right now, Callum Wade has filed on 3 of your parcels. You have a spy in your own bunkhouse, and there is something in the ground on your eastern property line that I need to show you tomorrow morning." She put her hands flat on the table. "So let's talk about what we're actually going to do." He blinked. And then something shifted in his face. The shame and the complexity of the moment moved sideways to make room for the steadier thing underneath. He leaned forward. "All right," he said, "talk." She talked. She told him what she had seen on the eastern line, the way the low ground drained, the quality of the pooling, the particular way the soil composition changed as you moved toward the Halverson fence. She told him what her mother had taught her about ground that held water that way, and what her mother's mother had known about springs in hill country that showed themselves through their edges before they showed themselves at the surface. She told him she believed there was a significant underground water source on or very near the eastern property boundary. The kind of source that, if confirmed, would make the Halverson corridor not just strategically useful but genuinely invaluable, not only to his northern land connection, but to every farm in the valley that depended on creek water that ran thin in the late summer months. She watched his face while she talked. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "My father believed the same thing," he said. "He said there was water under that low ground. Nobody took him seriously. Why not? Because he was old, and people thought he was talking about dowsing and superstition." Nathaniel's voice had gone tight with something old. "I never had the land properly surveyed. I always meant to." "But you were being invisible," she said. "But I was being invisible," he agreed. "If we survey that ground and confirm the source," Abigail said slowly, "and if it's what I think it is, then Wade isn't just trying to take a corridor. He's trying to cut you off from the most important water source in this valley." Nathaniel's face had gone to a place she hadn't seen it go before. Not anger exactly. Something beneath anger. The look of a man who has understood, all at once, the full size of what he's been up against without knowing it. "He knew," Nathaniel said quietly. "He's had surveyors out here. He knew what my father believed, and he investigated it himself." He stood up slowly from the table. "That's why he wants the eastern parcels. Not for the corridor. For the water." "Yes," Abigail said. He stood at the window. His back was to her, and she watched his shoulders, and the particular quality of his stillness, a man reckoning with something. "If the water is there," he said, "and Wade gets title to those parcels, He doesn't just own the land, she said. He controls the water for every farm in the valley. Every family that's been here for 20 years, every small operation that's survived on creek rights, they become dependent on a land company from Helena. She paused. And land companies from Helena are not known for their generosity. He turned from the window and looked at her. We survey it, he said. Tomorrow morning. You and me, Pete, can come, not Cord. No, he said, not Cord. She nodded. She stood up and began clearing the coffee cups. Her hands were steady. Her mind was moving in 3 directions at once: the survey, the legal challenge, the spy in the bunkhouse, and she was beginning to see how those 3 things connected into a shape she could work with. She heard him still standing at the window. Abigail, he said. She looked back. Why are you doing this, he said. You've been here 6 weeks. This isn't your fight. She looked at him for a long moment. You gave me honest work and a fair chance, she said. I told you that's all I was asking for. I didn't say I was only planning to take. He looked at her. She could not read everything that was in his face, and she had stopped trying. Some things deserve to be carried in private a little longer. She went back to the dishes. That night, after the house was asleep, she lay in her room and thought about the water and the land, and the man downstairs who owned 12,000 acres and dressed like he owned 40. She thought about Clara and the mare and Eli, learning that the roan saddle pad had a bad seam. She thought about Pete's quiet loyalty and Cord's careful watchfulness and the way she had not trusted herself to trust Cord and had been right. She thought about Red Hollow and her father and the steps of Miller's General Store. She thought, you came here with nothing but a worn coat and a willingness to work. And look where the work has taken you. She did not think it with triumph. She thought it with the particular sober gratitude of a woman who has learned not to celebrate things before they're finished, because the things worth celebrating are always the ones that required you to get through something hard first. Tomorrow morning, she told herself. Tomorrow we ride the Eastern Line. She was asleep before midnight. The survey took 3 hours. She and Nathaniel and Pete rode the eastern property line from north to south, and she pointed out the things she had been observing for weeks: the drainage patterns, the soil, the vegetation that grew specifically in ground that had consistent subterranean moisture, the slight topographic depression that was almost invisible at normal riding pace, but unmistakable once you knew to look for it. Pete said, about an hour in, Lord Almighty, under his breath, and she knew he was seeing it too. When they reached the low ground near the Halverson fence, she dismounted. Nathaniel dismounted beside her. She crouched down and pressed her hand into the soil. It was late October now, cold and firm at the surface, and felt the give underneath. Feel this, she said. Nathaniel crouched beside her and pressed his palm to the ground. She watched it warm, he said. Yes, she said. Ground temperature. You get that when there's a substantial water volume moving below it insulates. Your soil surface is warmer than the surrounding ground by about 4 feet in any direction. She stood up. Your father was right. There's a spring here, a significant one. If I had to estimate, based on the drainage patterns in the vegetation range. She paused. Nathaniel, this might be the primary source, feeding your creek. He stood up beside her and looked at the ground. Pete had ridden up and was looking too, his weathered face doing the complicated mathematics of a man who has spent 40 years on this land and is only now beginning to understand something about it. If feeds the creek, Pete said slowly, then every property that draws from the lower creek. Yes, every farm, every homestead. Yes, that's 8 families, Pete said. 9, counting the Halverson place. Yes, Abigail said, which is why Wade needs the eastern parcels. Not for the corridor, for this. Pete looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel was still looking at the ground. His jaw was tight and his eyes had gone somewhere. She recognized he was seeing the whole shape of it now, all at once, the same way she had seen it standing at the stove, the morning she'd understood what the land was telling her. He's been planning this for 2 years, Nathaniel said. At least, she said. He probably had the survey done before he ever walked up to your front porch with that neighborly smile. Pete said a word she was glad Clara wasn't there to hear. he said immediately. Don't be, she said. Nathaniel turned and looked at her. What do we do? We get a proper geological survey done before Wade can file anything else, she said. You need a surveyor from outside Helena, someone Wade's company doesn't have their hands on. And you need a lawyer who knows territorial water rights law. She paused. And you need to stop being invisible. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. But it was a different quality of quiet than the silence that had lived between them on the wagon ride north 6 weeks ago. That silence had been two strangers figuring out what the other one was. This silence was something that had found its shape. Two people who had been through enough in 6 weeks to know how the other one thought, and who were both, separately, building the next moves in their heads. When they got back to the yard, Nathaniel unsaddled his horse and looked at Pete. I need you to go to town today, he said, not Red Hollow. Billings. You know Harlan Dewey, Pete said, the surveyor? Tell him what we found. Tell him I need him out here by the end of the week. He paused. Tell him what he brings in his report may end up in territorial court, and I'll pay him accordingly. Pete nodded. And Cord? Nathaniel looked at the bunkhouse. Leave Cord to me, Pete rode out within the hour. The Cord conversation happened at noon. Abigail was in the kitchen and heard raised voices from the yard, not shouting, but the particular intensity of words being spoken with all their weight behind them. She did not go to the window. This was between Nathaniel and the young man, and she had already said her piece about what needed doing. The doing was Nathaniel's. 15 minutes later, she heard a horse leave the yard at a clip that was not the pace of someone going on an errand. Nathaniel came into the kitchen and poured himself water at the basin. His jaw was tight, and his shoulders had the held careful quality of a man who has just done something necessary and unpleasant. He confirmed it, she said. He confirmed it. Nathaniel drank the water. Wade paid him to report on my movements and any visitors to the property. He'd been doing it for 2 months. He set the cup down. He didn't know about the water. He hadn't heard enough to know about that. Good, she said. He's just a kid, Nathaniel said, and there was something in it that was not quite mercy but adjacent to it. Kids can do damage, she said. You did the right thing. He nodded once. He stood at the basin for a moment. Then I want to go to Red Hollow. She looked up. When? The town meeting is Saturday, the quarterly one at the church. Every landowner in the valley comes. He turned and looked at her. I've been attending those meetings for 3 years and never said a word that mattered. She looked at him steadily. And Saturday? Saturday I'm going to tell them about the water, he said. All of it. What it is, what's under that ground, what Wade is trying to do with his legal challenge, his jaw set. I'm going to tell them who I am and what I own, and what's at stake for every family in this valley if that land goes to a company from Helena. The kitchen was very quiet. You understand what that does, she said. Once Skies is finished, he said. I know. People will be angry, she said. They've been told one thing for 3 years. Men don't like discovering they've been wrong about something. I know. And some of them will still prefer Wade, because Wade's company has money and lawyers and promises. I know that too. Then why are you sure? He looked back at her. Because you told me that you can't negotiate with someone who has decided to take from you, he said. And because my son told me the loud one wins in this valley. And because there are 8 families drawing from that creek who have a right to know what's underneath it. She was quiet for a moment. And the Halverson property? I'm going to make Halverson an offer refused, Nathaniel said. Above market today. Before Wade gets wind that Cord is gone and figures out we're moving. She stood up. Then we should write the offer today. You'll want it worded right, she said simply. She moved to the study door. Do you have paper? He stared at her for one more second. Then, for the first time since she had come to this ranch, he smiled, not the almost smile, not the thing at the corner of his mouth that came and went. A real smile, full and unguarded. That changed the whole architecture of his face and made him look for a brief and startling moment, like the man he must have been before 3 years of loss and careful hiding had assembled themselves around him. "Yes," he said. "I have paper." They worked on the Halverson offer for an hour, side by side at the study desk, and the strange contained intimacy of two people building something serious together settled over them like weather. She wrote, he dictated. She revised, he reconsidered. They argued twice about specific phrasing, both times briefly and productively, and came out the other side with language that was honest and strong. When it was finished, she sanded it dry and read it through once more. "It's good," she said. "It is," he agreed. He was looking not at the paper but at the side of her face. She felt it, the way you feel someone's attention when it has a particular quality, and she didn't look up. "Nathaniel," she said to the paper. "Don't." A pause. "Don't what?" "Don't look at me like that right now," she said, calm and even. "We have too much to do, and I am not finished being angry at you about the land titles. And when we have time for whatever that look means, I'll tell you." Another pause, longer. "Fair enough," he said. She stood up and carried the offer letter to the door. "Ride to the Halverson place this afternoon," she said. "Take it yourself, don't send it. Make sure he reads it in front of you." "I will, and Nathaniel." She stopped in the doorway. "When you ride through Red Hollow on the way there, don't avoid anyone's eyes." He picked up his hat from the desk. "Starting early," he said. "Starting now," she said. He left. She stood in the study for a moment, alone, with the afternoon light coming through the window and the land outside rolling away in every direction, this vast, impossible land that this man owned, and had been pretending not to own while the world arranged itself around his pretending. She thought about Saturday. She thought about walking into the Red Hollow church meeting at Nathaniel's side. She thought about the faces that would turn toward them, Cale Briggs and the woman from the store steps, and everyone who had laughed, and everyone who had watched the laughing without stopping it. She thought about standing in a room full of those faces and being seen. Not as a charity case, not as somebody's consolation prize. As the woman who had found the water, she squared her shoulders. Then she went back to the kitchen, because supper wasn't going to make itself, and there was work to do. Nathaniel came back from the Halverson place at dusk with a signed agreement in his coat pocket and a look on his face like a man who has just moved the right piece on a board and is watching the position clarify. He stood in the kitchen doorway and held up the paper. She kept her eyes on the stove. "Halverson said yes?" "Halverson said yes so fast I wondered if he'd been hoping for it," Nathaniel said. "He's been nervous about Wade's company buying up his neighbors. He didn't know how to say no to them without someone to stand with. Now he has someone to stand with. Now he has someone to stand with." He put the paper away. "His property ties into my eastern parcels starting Monday. I'm having the deed registered by telegraph to Helena tonight." She turned from the stove. "Tonight?" Before Wade hears about Cord, his eyes were steady. "Once that transfer registers, the Eastern legal challenge falls apart. You can't file a competing claim on parcels that connect a completed registered acquisition." She looked at him. "You had this ready." "The Halverson offer was ready," he said. "I just needed to be sure about the water first." She stared at him. "You were waiting for me to find the water." "I was waiting for someone to help me see what my father saw," he said quietly. "Turns out that someone happened to be you." She didn't know what to say to that. She turned back to the stove. Her face was doing something she was not entirely in control of. Clara appeared from the hallway. "Supper ready?" she asked. 10 minutes, Abigail said. Clara went and stood beside Nathaniel in the doorway and leaned against his arm, and he put his hand on the top of her head the way parents do, automatic, complete, the most natural gesture in the world. He was looking at Abigail with an expression that had everything in it she had said she wasn't ready for, and several things she didn't have words for yet. 10 minutes, she said again to the stove. Saturday came cold and clear. They rode into Red Hollow in a group, Nathaniel and Abigail and Eli, and Pete, who had come back from with Harlan Dewey's verbal commitment and a handshake deal that held the weight of a legal document. Even Dewey himself rode along, because Nathaniel had asked him to, because the survey results that Dewey had already begun drawing up were the kind of evidence that needed to be present in the room where decisions were being made. The church was already full when they arrived. Abigail walked in beside Nathaniel and felt the shift, that particular pull shift of collective attention reorienting itself. She heard the murmur, she felt the eyes. She kept her chin level and her face composed, and she did not look at any one person directly because she was saving that for when it mattered. She sat in the second row. Eli sat beside her. Clara was at the ranch with the gray mare, which had insisted on following the girl around the barn that morning like a large and devoted dog. The meeting was 20 minutes old before Nathaniel stood up. He stood and the room went quiet, that particular quiet that happens when people sense that something is about to be different, when the air changes quality just before the thing that changes it happens. He told them. He told them who he was, not the poor rancher, not the forgettable man at the edge of things, but Nathaniel James Brooks, owner of 12,000 acres of Red Hollow Valley, and the son of the man who had believed for 30 years that there was water under the eastern ground. He told them about the spring. He told them about Wade's legal challenge and what it was actually aimed at. He told them about the Halverson acquisition. He laid it out plain and clear, and without drama, in the steady, unhurried voice that she had come to understand was the real voice, not the one that was performing ordinariness, but the one that came out when something was genuinely important. The room erupted. Not all at once, it was more like a wave. Starting at the back where the older ranchers sat and moving forward as the information reached people, and they understood what it meant. There was anger. There was disbelief. A man near the back stood up and said something about deception that had an ugly shape to it, and Nathaniel listened to it without flinching and said, "You're right to be angry. But ask yourself who you're angry at." Cale Briggs stood up. "You let us all think, I let you think what you were already comfortable thinking," Nathaniel said, and his voice was very even. "I didn't deceive anyone who was paying attention. I just stopped correcting a story that suited the people telling it." "Silence, the water is there," Nathaniel said. "My surveyor has the preliminary findings. When that spring is confirmed, and it will be confirmed, the water rights belong to this valley. Not to a company from Helena, not to anyone who bought them under the cover of a legal challenge that was filed in bad faith." He looked around the room. "But only if you know about it. Only if you stand behind it." Abigail sat in the second row and watched the room. She watched people she had known her whole life recalculate. She watched the shapes of their thinking change in their faces, the resistance, the shock, the grudging arithmetic of people who were being forced to update something they'd held for a long time. She watched older ranchers look at each other. She watched a woman near the window press her hand to her mouth. And then Harlan Dewey stood up and unrolled his preliminary survey map on the table at the front of the room, and people came forward to look at it. And the room changed again, not into chaos, but into the particular serious energy of people who have just understood that something they need is real. Someone asked how much water. Dewey said enough to see this valley through 10 dry summers. The room was silent for a full 3 seconds, and then it was not silent anymore. She did not hear her father come in. She didn't know he was there until the meeting was half over, until the worst of the arguing and the clarifying and the demanding of details had settled into something that had the shape of resolution. She turned her head for some reason she couldn't have named, instinct, or the particular quality of being watched by someone who carries guilt, and she saw him standing at the back of the church. Eugene Carter, thinner than she remembered, older looking. He was watching her with an expression she had never once seen on his face in 26 years of being his daughter. He looked ashamed. She held his gaze for one long moment. Then she turned back to the front of the room, because Nathaniel was answering another question, and she needed to hear his answer, and there would be time for her father later. There would be time now, for things that had seemed impossible before. Because the room was tilting, she could feel it. The way a balance tips, not all at once, but in small increments, each person's recalculation adding its weight to one side, until the thing that had seemed permanent suddenly wasn't. Cale Briggs sat down. The man near the back with the ugly comment about deception was talking to his neighbor in a low voice that had lost its certainty. The woman near the window was asking Dewey about the survey timeline with the focused attention of someone who has decided to be useful. Abigail sat in the second row of the Red Hollows church, in her better dress and her mother's coat that still smelled of lavender if she pressed her face to it, and she thought, "It is happening. The thing that needed to happen is happening." Nathaniel finished speaking and sat down. He sat down next to her, close enough that his shoulder was an inch from hers, and he was looking straight ahead. And she could feel the exhaustion coming off him, the particular exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something heavy in secret for a long time and has just finally put it down in public. She put her hand on the pew between them, not on his hand. On the wood an inch from his, close enough that he felt it. He looked down at the space between their hands. He did not move his hand closer. Neither did she, but neither of them moved away. The meeting lasted another hour. By the end of it, 3 Valley landowners had offered to provide sworn statements supporting Nathaniel's original title registrations. Dewey had set a date for the full survey, and someone had sent a boy running to the telegraph office to get a message to Helena before Wade could hear what had happened in this room and mount a response. When they walked out of the church into the cold afternoon, Eli was beside her. He fell into step on her left, Nathaniel on her right, and the 3 of them walked to the horses in a line that felt in its specificity like a declaration. She heard someone behind her say her name not unkindly. She heard someone else say, "That's Carter's girl," and then someone correcting it, "That's Miss Carter." The Brooks Ranch, she kept walking. At the horses, Eli looked at her. "You knew they'd listen," he said. "I thought they might," she said. "If your father told them the truth." "He wouldn't have," Eli said. "Not without you." She looked at the boy, this tall, dark-haired boy with his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, and 3 years of grief pressed into his spine like weather. "He would have eventually," she said. "He was getting there." "Maybe," Eli said. "But you made it now." She put her boot in the stirrup. "Eli," she said before she mounted, "you told him the loud one wins in this valley. You said it before I did. Don't sell yourself short." He blinked. Then he looked away, doing the particular thing that 15-year-old boys do when something has gotten through the armor, the careful neutralizing of the expression, the studied examination of something in the middle distance. But she had seen it get through. That was enough. She mounted and Nathaniel mounted beside her, and they turned their horses north toward home. The valley spread around them, wide and cold and achingly real, the land that had seemed, 6 weeks ago, like just a place she had landed. It did not feel like that now. It felt like something she was part of. Something she had changed by being in it. She thought about the spring. The water under the eastern ground waiting. She thought about the valley and the 8 families and the winter coming. She thought about everything that was still not finished because nothing was finished. The legal challenge was not yet dropped. Dewey's survey was not yet complete. Wade would come back, she was sure of it, and he would come back smarter and harder because men like Wade did not accept a single lost engagement as a loss. They regrouped, they recalculated, but the room had shifted. And the water was real, and the woman who had walked into Red Hollow 6 weeks ago as someone nobody wanted was riding out of it today as someone this valley was going to need to understand differently. She rode beside Nathaniel in the late afternoon cold, and neither of them spoke, and the silence between them was the right kind now, not 2 strangers figuring each other out, but 2 people who had figured each other out enough to be comfortable in the space that remained. After a mile, he said, "Thank you." She said, "You would have gotten there." "Not today," he said. She looked at the road ahead. Today was enough, she said. The horses moved north through the cold air, and the valley held them, and somewhere under the eastern ground the water ran on, quiet and constant, doing what it had been doing for 1,000 years, waiting for someone to find it and understand what it was worth. Wade came back on a Wednesday. Abigail was in the kitchen when she heard the horse in the yard, and she knew before she looked up who it was. She had been expecting it. 11 days had passed since the church meeting, 11 days of the valley rearranging itself around the truth that Nathaniel had put into the room, and she had spent every one of those days waiting for the other boot to drop. Men like Callum Wade did not lose a public engagement and go home quietly. They came back differently shaped. She dried her hands and went to the window. He had brought someone with him this time. A man she didn't recognize, older, in a good coat, carrying a leather document satchel that announced itself as expensive from 20 yards. A lawyer. She had expected that too. Nathaniel was already in the yard. He had seen them coming up the road from the north pasture and had ridden back, and he was standing at the fence now, not going to meet them, making them come to him. She noted that. He was doing it differently already. She went out onto the porch. Wade swung down from his horse with that fitted automatic ease and tipped his hat at Nathaniel. Then he looked at the porch and tipped it at Abigail, and the smile that came with it was the same smile, warm, calculated, designed for rooms, but something behind it had changed. He was reassessing. She could feel it from across the yard. "Nathaniel," he said. "Beautiful morning." "Callum," Nathaniel said. "You want to tell me who your friend is, or are we doing the neighborly part first?" Wade glanced back at the man behind him. "This is Mr. Aldous Fry. He handles legal matters for the company." "Then this isn't a neighborly visit," Nathaniel said. "It can be both," Wade said, and the smile held. Abigail came down the porch steps. She had not been invited into this conversation, and she was joining it anyway, the way she had learned to join things she had a right to be part of, whether or not the room had thought to include her. She stood beside Nathaniel. Wade's eyes to her with that calculating warmth, and Fry's eyes moved to her with the particular look of a man who is filing information about obstacles. "Miss Carter," Wade said. She said, "Miss Fry." Fry nodded. He was the kind of man who had learned to save his words for the moments they cost something, and she respected that, even about an adversary. "We've come to make a formal offer," Wade said. He gestured to Fry, who opened the satchel and produced a document. "The company is prepared to drop the legal challenge on the northern parcels in exchange for a water rights agreement on the eastern spring." Abigail felt Nathaniel go still beside her. "The spring that you filed no claim on," Nathaniel said. "The spring that sits on disputed territory," Wade said pleasantly. "The survey is ongoing. The outcome isn't certain." "Harlan Dewey's preliminary findings are already filed in Helena," Abigail said. "The spring source is 14 feet inside registered Brooks property." "There is no dispute." Fry looked at her. "Preliminary findings are not final determinations, Miss Carter," she said. "And no, they're not final. But they're sufficient for a territorial judge to deny your challenge, which is what happened 2 days ago, as I expect you know, since your company received the ruling yesterday morning." The yard was very quiet. Wade's smile had not moved. That was the thing about men who were very good at what they did. The smile stayed in place while everything behind it reorganized. "The ruling is on the challenge," he said carefully. "It doesn't address the water rights question directly." "Because there is no water rights question," Nathaniel said. "The spring is on my land. The water is mine." "Nathaniel." Wade's voice shifted. It went warmer, more personal, dropping the professional register for something that sounded like concern. "It was very well done. I've known you for 2 years. I've always respected you. I think there's a way to handle this that benefits everyone in this valley, including you." He took a step forward. "Water rights are complicated. Sharing them fairly, with appropriate compensation, could be the most profitable arrangement you've made in 10 years. You want to buy access to water that feeds 8 families, Nathaniel said, and then sell it back to them. That's a very blunt way of. It's the accurate way, Abigail said. Wade looked at her. The warmth in his voice cooled by exactly 1 degree, just enough to be noticeable, not enough to be impolite. With respect, Miss Carter, this is a negotiation between landowners. Miss Carter is my household manager, Nathaniel said. She stays, of course, Wade said. The smile, of course she does. Fry cleared his throat and held out the document. The offer is straightforward, he said. 40% of water rights held in trust by the company, with guaranteed access for all current valley users at a fixed rate, reviewed annually. Reviewed by Gale asked. Fry looked at her. The company would manage the review process. So the company sets the rate, she said, and reviews the rate. And the families who have been drawing from that creek for 20 years pay whatever the company decides is fair, and the company calls that guaranteed access. Fry's jaw moved slightly. The agreement includes protections. Written by company lawyers, she said. Filed in Helena. She looked at Wade. Mr. Wade, I grew up watching my father sign agreements he didn't fully understand, with men who were very pleasant about explaining them. I understand what this offer is, and I think the families in this valley will understand it too once it's explained plainly. Wade said. Still pleasant. Only barely. It's a statement of intention, she said. We plan to share Dewey's full survey results with every landowner in this valley as soon as they're finalized, including the section that shows the spring's reach and which properties it feeds. People tend to make clearer decisions when they have complete information. Wade was quiet for a moment. He looked at Nathaniel. She speaks for you? She speaks the truth, Nathaniel said. Which makes her worth listening to. The two men looked at each other, the real look, underneath all the pleasantness, strategy, the look that two people exchange when the performance has run its course and they are down to the actual thing. Abigail watched it happen and stayed very still. You're making an enemy, Wade said quietly. You were never a friend, Nathaniel said, just as quietly. Fry put the document back in the satchel. Wade took a step back. He put his hat on. He looked at the house, at the yard, at the land beyond it, and she saw something move across his face that was not quite acceptance and not quite defeat, but was the specific expression of a man who has revised his estimate of a situation and doesn't particularly like the revision. This valley is changing, he said, with or without an agreement. Yes, Nathaniel said. Wade mounted his horse. Fry mounted beside him. They rode out the way they had come, and Abigail stood in the yard beside Nathaniel and watched them go, and neither of them spoke until the sound of hooves had faded entirely. Then Pete's voice came from the barn doorway. They coming back? Not the same way, Nathaniel said. Abigail exhaled slowly. Her shoulders, which she had been holding with the particular careful tension of someone performing calm, came down a half-inch. She was aware, very suddenly, of being cold. The yard was cold, and the morning was cold, and the winter was settling into the valley. For real, now the kind of cold that didn't go away until April. You all right, Nathaniel said. He was looking at her. Yes, she said. He was quiet for a moment. That was the last card he had. He thinks so, she said. So do I. She turned toward the house. I'll have coffee ready. It took another 3 weeks for the survey to be completed and filed. 26 days of weather and waiting, and the particular tension of a situation that has been decided in principle but not yet confirmed in fact. Abigail filled those days the way she filled all of them, with work, with the steady accumulation of small things done well, with the children and the animals and the kitchen and the quiet. Growing knowledge that she had made something of this place, and it had made something of her in return. The gray mare was fully recovered. She followed Clara around the barn with a devotion that made Pete shake his head and smile. Clara had started teaching the mare to bow, a trick she had read about in one of Abigail's books, and had reported her progress each evening at supper with the focused seriousness of someone who has given themselves a real project. Eli had stopped sitting at the far end of the table. He sat in the middle now, close enough to the conversation to join it when he chose, and he chose more often than he used to. He had started asking Abigail questions about the land, about soil and water management, about the things she had learned from her mother and her mother's mother, about reading ground. She answered every question straight, without simplifying, and he absorbed the answers with the quiet intensity of a boy who had been hungry for something to care about, and was only now discovering that he had permission to care about this. One evening he said, entirely without preamble, "You know more about this land than Pa does." She looked up from the stove. "Your father knows this land in ways I don't," she said. "He spent 15 years on it. I've spent 2 months. But you see it different," Eli said. "Different isn't better," she said. It's just a different angle. You need both. He thought about that. Like two eyes, he said. She looked at him. Exactly like that, she said. He nodded and went back to the book he'd been reading. She went back to the stove. But the thing that had just happened between them settled into the kitchen like warmth, and she carried it the way she carried all the good things carefully, without making a ceremony of it, so it didn't get self-conscious and go away. The survey results came back on a Thursday in mid-November, and Harlan Dewey rode out himself to deliver them because he said a document this significant deserved a face and a handshake. They sat at the kitchen table, Nathaniel and Dewey and Abigail, with Eli hovering in the doorway and Pete leaning against the far wall, and Dewey laid out the survey in language that was technical and precise and entirely unambiguous. The spring source was 19 feet inside registered Brooks property. The aquifer, because that was what it was, Dewey said, not just a spring but a genuine aquifer of significant volume, had a reach of approximately 12 miles, feeding 7 creek tributaries, serving 11 properties including the Halverson place, which was now registered to Nathaniel. 11, not 8. 11. 3 families she hadn't known were drawing from the same source. Dewey said the water volume was consistent with what he'd expect from a formation of this type and age, and that with proper management, it was more than sufficient for current valley use and projected growth over the next 30 years. 30 years. Abigail looked at the survey map spread across the kitchen table. She looked at the reach of the aquifer, the blue-marked lines of its tributaries, the properties they touched. She thought about all of it going to a company from Helena. She thought about annual rate reviews and fixed agreements, and the particular comfortable pleasantness of men who made their livings deciding what other people needed and how much it should cost them. She thought about the water running quiet and constant under the eastern ground, while all of this was happening above it, indifferent to human scheming, doing what it had been doing for 10,000 years. It's beautiful, she said, and she meant the aquifer, and also everything that the aquifer meant. Dewey looked at her with the particular respect of a professional who has met another professional in an unexpected place. You found it, Miss Carter, he said. I just measured it. Nathaniel was looking at her. She didn't look back. She studied the map. What happens now, she asked. Now it goes into the territorial registry as a documented water resource with established ownership, Dewey said. Any company trying to file a claim on it will be going against a complete and certified survey. It's not impossible, he paused, but it's not worth their while. The legal cost would exceed any profit they could extract. So Wade is finished, Pete said from the wall. Wade's company is finished with this valley, Dewey said carefully. Wade himself will move on to someone else's land. That's the nature of men like that. Pete said the same word he'd said in the eastern pasture. Dewey pretended not to hear it. Thank you, Harlan, Nathaniel said. He stood and offered his hand, and Dewey shook it with the solemnity of a man who has just put his name on something that matters. After Dewey left, the kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Then Clara came in from the barn. She had apparently been there through all of it, which meant she had heard every word through the window that Abigail noticed was open 2 inches, and she walked directly to Abigail and put her arms around her waist and pressed her face into Abigail's side. Abigail's hands came up, one on the girl's back, one on the top of her dark hair. She stood very still for a moment and let herself feel it, this small, particular warmth, this 9-year-old's unguarded trust, the most uncomplicated good thing that had happened in 2 months of complicated and difficult things. You all right, sweetheart? She said. Clara's voice was muffled against her side. I was scared, I know, Abigail said. But it's okay now? It's going to be okay, Abigail said. Yes. Clara looked up at her. Her dark eyes were serious and very clear. Are you staying? She asked. The kitchen was completely silent. Eli had gone still in the doorway. Pete was studying the wall with sudden intensity. Nathaniel was looking at his daughter. Abigail looked down at the girl. Her heart was doing something she had not consulted it about. Clara, Nathaniel said gently. I want to know, Clara said. She was not rude about it. She had that quality, the one that Abigail had noticed, from the beginning of a child who asked real questions and expected real answers, and could tell the difference between truth and management. Abigail looked at Nathaniel. He looked back at her. "I'm not going anywhere," Abigail said, "not unless someone asks me to leave." Clara looked at her father. Nathaniel looked at Abigail. "Nobody's asking you to leave," he said. It was a quiet thing. It was the right amount of thing for a kitchen with a 9-year-old and a teenager and Pete, who was still examining the wall with tremendous focus. Clara seemed satisfied. She unwrapped her arms and went back to the barn. Eli disappeared into the hallway. Pete found somewhere else to be. And Nathaniel and Abigail were alone in the kitchen for the first time since Helena, and the still on the table, between them, and the fire was going in the stove. And outside the Montana winter had arrived fully and finally, and the cold was absolute. "She's not subtle," Nathaniel said. "No," Abigail said. "She isn't." She began rolling the survey map. "She gets that from somewhere." "Her mother," he said. She glanced at him. He was looking at the map, but his expression was the open one, the unmanaged one that she had seen on the porch the night of the church meeting, and only a handful of times before that. "She was direct," he said. "About everything. It drove me crazy, and I was grateful for it every day." He paused. "She would have liked you." Abigail didn't say anything for a moment. "She set the map aside, Nathaniel," she said. "What you said that day in the study, when you told me why you didn't walk away from the steps." "About the spine," he said. "I need you to know something." She turned and looked at him directly. "I was not at my best that day. I was terrified. I was humiliated. I was running the numbers on what my options were, and none of them were good." She paused. "What you saw as spine was mostly stubbornness and the fact that I had nothing left to lose." "I know," he said. "That's not what made it impressive." She looked at him. "What made it impressive," he said, "was that you said the right thing anyway. Even when you were terrified. Even when the whole town was watching." He held her gaze. "Most people in that moment would have looked for any way out that didn't require them to be brave. You didn't." She was quiet for a moment. "I was looking for any way out," she said. "Your offer was it. And yet you came in like you owned the place," he said. And there was the almost smile, but fuller than it had ever been, less careful, showing more of itself than usual. "I came in like I intended to earn my place," she said. "There's a difference." "Yes," he said, "there is." He was quiet for a moment. "You've earned considerably more than you know." The fire in the stove was the loudest thing in the kitchen. She should say something practical now. She knew this. She should redirect the conversation back to the survey or the next steps with the territorial registry or the share meeting she had been planning with the valley landowners for the following Tuesday. She was good at redirection. She had used it as a tool for most of her life. She did not use it now. "I told you I wasn't finished being angry," she said. "Yes, I'm finished," she said. Being angry, she looked at the table. "About the land titles. I understood eventually why you did it. I don't agree with the method, but I understand it." "I know," he said. "And I told you to tell me when there was time," she said. For whatever the look meant, the kitchen was absolutely still. "There's time," he said. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with the full, unguarded face, no management, no careful distance, nothing held in reserve. It was the most honest expression she had ever seen on a human being, which should not have surprised her because she had learned, over 12 weeks on this ranch, that this man's currency was honesty even when he was being invisible. Maybe especially when he was being invisible, because the invisibility itself had been a kind of honesty about what he was afraid of. He was not invisible now. "I'm not an easy woman," she said. It was the most direct thing she had said to him, and she had said some very direct things. "I know that," he said. "I have opinions about land management, and I am almost certainly right more often than is comfortable." "You have been right approximately every time," he said. "I take up space," she said. "In rooms." "Yes," he said. "You do. And I'm not going to stop." "I'm not asking you to," he said. He said it with the simple, absolute steadiness of a man who has thought about this and is not speaking from the moment but from something settled. Abigail, I have spent 3 years making myself small. I don't want to be small anymore, and I don't want the person beside me to be small. He paused. I want the woman who walked up to Wade on my porch and told him the bunkhouse or the road. I want the woman who found water my father couldn't prove. I want the woman who sat in the second row of that church and held her chin level, while the whole valley recalculated itself around the truth she helped put in the room. She looked at him for a long time. Her heart was doing the unconsulted thing again, and she was not stopping it. That's a high standard, she said. You said it, he said. I'm just asking you to keep meeting it. A pause. With me. She was quiet. Outside the kitchen window, the winter land lay still and pale under the cold sky, and the valley that had laughed at her 12 weeks ago was quiet now, changed and real, shaped partly by her hands. All right, she said. It was a quiet word. It was the right size for the moment, not a performance, not a declaration, but an honest answer from an honest woman to a man who had earned it. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not dramatically. Simply. The way you place a hand when what you want to communicate is I am here and I mean it and I am not going anywhere, and all of those things are true at the same time without requiring elaboration. She turned her hand over under his. They sat like that for a moment in the kitchen, in the quiet. Then she said, "There's the Valley meeting Tuesday. I need to talk to you about how to present the aquifer data so it doesn't overwhelm the Greer family. They're the least." "Abigail," he said. 10 minutes, he said. "Give me 10 minutes before we go back to work." She looked at him. She looked at his hand on hers. She thought about 2 months of never stopping, of every hour filled with the next necessary thing, of the particular discipline of a woman who has learned to earn her place by staying useful. 10 minutes, she said, and she stopped. She just stopped. She sat in the chair in the warm kitchen with Nathaniel's hand over hers, and the survey map rolled up on the table and the fire going in the stove, and she did not think about Tuesday or Wade or the aquifer or the Valley meeting. She thought about her mother's coat and the lavender. She thought about the day she had stepped forward on the steps of Miller's General Store. She thought about the wagon road north and the gray sky opening up and the particular feeling of going somewhere instead of being left behind. She thought, look where you are now. Not with triumph. With something quieter and more lasting than triumph. With the particular satisfaction of a woman who has done the work and built the thing and stood in the rooms that needed standing in, and who finds herself, at the end of all of it, sitting somewhere warm with her hand held by someone who sees her clearly and is glad of what he sees. 10 minutes. She gave herself 10 minutes. The Valley meeting on Tuesday brought out 19 people, more than anyone had expected. Abigail stood at the front of the church hall beside Nathaniel and presented Dewey's survey findings in plain language, the way she did everything directly, without condescension, treating the people in the room as capable of handling true things. The Greer family, as she had predicted, needed the most time. Old Thomas Greer was 81 years old and had been drawing from the lower creek for 40 years and was suspicious of anything that suggested his relationship with that water was more complicated than he'd understood it to be. Abigail sat with him specifically, away from the main group, and walked him through it with the patience she had once used on a 9-year-old in a barn. Different person, same principle. You went at the pace the trust allowed. Thomas Greer, at the end of 45 minutes, said, "So nobody's taking the water." "Nobody's taking the water," she said. "And the registration means it can't be sold out from under us." "That's what it means." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're Carter's daughter," he said. "Yes, sir." "Eugene Carter's a fool," he said, without particular malice. "Always was." "Yes, sir," she said. "He is." Thomas Greer made a sound that might have been approval, and might have been simply the sound an old man makes when he has processed enough information for one day. He shook her hand. His grip was still strong. "Good work, Miss Carter," he said. She thanked him and went back to the front of the room. Her father was there again. Same place as the church meeting, the back, standing rather than sitting, watching with that expression that had not changed since the first time she'd seen it after everything began. Ashamed. genuinely ashamed, in the helpless way of people who cannot undo what they've done and have not yet figured out how to apologize for it. This time she walked toward him. He looked like he might back up. He didn't. She stopped in front of him. He was shorter than she remembered. Or she was standing differently than she used to. "Abigail," he said. His voice was rough. "Pa," she said. The silence between them had 26 years of complicated things in it, and she was not going to resolve all of them in the back of a church hall on a Tuesday night. She knew that. She also knew that she was done carrying things she hadn't chosen to carry, and resentment was one of those things, and it had been getting heavy. "What you did," she said. "In front of everyone." He looked at the floor. "I know. I need to hear you say it," she said. "Not for me. For you. Because you're going to be carrying it otherwise, and I don't want that for you." She paused. "Say it, Pa." He was quiet for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, which she had not expected and which was harder to look at than anger would have been. "I was ashamed," he said. "Of the farm. Of myself. And I took it out on you. I put your humiliation in front of my own so I wouldn't have to stand in it alone." He stopped. His jaw worked. "That ain't what a father does. I know it." "No," she said. "I'm sorry, Abigail." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the coat that still smelled of lavender. She thought about the 4 ranch hands and her father's farm and 6 years of making enough from nothing. She thought about what it cost a person to keep going when the ground under them kept giving way. "I know you are," she said, "and I know you were drowning. That doesn't make it right, but I understand it." He nodded. He was looking at her the way he had not looked at her in many years, seeing her, all of her, without the freight of his own failures getting in between. "She's right, you know," he said. His voice had changed. Something softer in it. "Everyone's talking about what you found. The water. Everyone's talking about what Nathaniel put in front of them," she said. "I just helped him see what was already there." "That's not what people are saying," her father said. She looked at him. "They're saying Carter's daughter saved this valley," he said. He said it with something she had never once heard in his voice when speaking about her in her entire life. "They're saying she came here with nothing and found what everybody'd been standing on top of and never knew it." He paused. "They're saying she's the smartest woman in this valley." She was very quiet. "I should have said things like that when it mattered," he said. "A long time ago. You should have." He nodded. He accepted that the way old men accept things that cannot be changed with a kind of bleak honesty that was at least honest. "Can I come for supper?" he said, "sometime. I'm not asking for anything." I'll let you know," she said. And then, because she was her mother's daughter and her mother had been capable of hard things and also of grace, "Give me a little time." "All right," he said, "I've got time." She nodded. She turned and went back to the front of the room. Nathaniel caught her eye from across the hall. He had seen. He said nothing. He gave her one small, steady nod, the kind that means "I'm here, and whatever happened was yours to handle and you handled it." She looked away and went back to Thomas Greer's neighbor, who had a question about tributary rights. Spring came the way it always came to Montana, not gently, not all at once, but in arguments, warm days surrendering back to cold snow and mud and then abruptly green. Abigail had watched winter settle into the valley and watched it lift again, and both things had marked her the way seasons mark the people who live inside them. The Aquifer Survey had been officially filed in February. Wade's company had not mounted another challenge, whether that was Dewey's airtight survey or the valley's unified stance or simply the calculation that the cost-benefit no longer made sense. Abigail didn't know and didn't particularly care. What she knew was that the water was registered and the land was documented, and 11 families were drawing from the creek without fear of what might happen to it. The Halverson property was being worked. Nathaniel had hired 2 men for it, and Eli had taken on a supervisory role that he discharged with the focused intensity of a boy who has found his purpose and is only beginning to understand its dimensions. He came to Abigail twice a week with questions. She answered them, and occasionally asked one back, the Socratic method of a woman who had learned most of what she knew by being made to figure things out rather than being told them. Clara's mare had learned to bow. The performance of this at the spring cattle gathering had been the source of considerable entertainment for the valley's assembled ranchers, and Clara had accepted their appreciation with the composed dignity of a 9-year-old who feels this was only the appropriate response to considerable effort. Nathaniel's coat was better now. Not fine, he would never be a fine coat kind of man, and she wouldn't want him to be, but decent. She had made him buy it in February, standing in the Helena Mercantile with the pragmatic authority of a woman who has decided that some battles are worth fighting and some are worth letting go, and this one was worth fighting. He had submitted to it with the particular patience of a man who has learned that some arguments are over before they start. He was not hiding anymore. That was the change she noticed most, in herself and in him, the quality of presence. He spoke at the valley meetings now, and his voice carried, and people listened not because of the 12,000 acres, but because he had spent 3 years being invisible, and the contrast made people pay attention when he chose to be seen. He had earned a different kind of trust than money could build, the trust of people who believe that someone with power has chosen to use it honestly. She stood on the porch one April morning, coffee in hand, and watched him ride out toward the northern pasture with Eli beside him, the two of them moving at the same pace, talking about something she couldn't hear. She watched the way Eli sat the horse less tight than he had in October, more settled, the particular ease of a boy who has begun to trust the ground under him. The gray mare appeared at the paddock fence and watched them go. Clara appeared beside the mare a moment later, because the mare did not go anywhere without Clara knowing about it. Pete came around the corner of the barn and stopped beside Abigail on the porch. "Valley's different," he said. "Yes," she said. "On account of the water," he said. "Partly," she said. He looked at her sideways. "On account of you," he said. She drank her coffee. "I found some water," she said. "The valley did the rest." Pete shook his head. "You know that ain't right." "I know it's the version I'm comfortable with," she said. He made a sound that was mostly a laugh and went back to the barn. She stood on the porch and looked at the land. 12,000 acres that she had not sought and could not have predicted, and had come to understand the way she understood most things, by paying attention. By staying. By refusing to be small in spaces that tried to make her small. She thought about the steps of Miller's General Store and the crowd laughing. She thought about the wagon road north, the gray sky, the word nobody pressed like a thumbprint into the soft part of her chest. She thought about everything the world had been so confident was true about her: too heavy, too plain, too much, never enough, nobody's choice, nobody's first thought, nobody's anything. She thought, look what nobody did. Nobody found the water that saved this valley. Nobody put her spine straight on those steps while the crowd made its noise. Nobody sat with Clara in the barn straw and learned how to be trusted. Nobody helped Nathaniel Brooks stop hiding long enough to be known. Nobody walked into the back of a church hall and said to her father, "Say it, Pa." Let it be real. Nobody had done all of that. And nobody was standing on this porch in the Montana spring morning with her coffee and her mother's coat, and eye she had changed, spread out before her, and the man she had chosen and who had chosen her, clearly, seriously. With the deliberate intention of a man who does not say things he doesn't mean, riding north toward his land with his son beside him. Nobody. She had walked into Red Hollow as the woman nobody wanted. She was standing in the valley as the woman this land could not have done without. The spring wind moved through the high grass of the eastern pasture, the same pasture where the ground held its water close and constant, the same ground that had spoken to her before it spoke to anyone else, because she had been paying attention. Because that was what she did. She paid attention, and she did the work, and she stayed. That was all she had ever asked for, an honest chance. She had taken it with both hands, and she had built something real and lasting from it, and the valley would remember it long after the men who had laughed at her on those steps were forgotten. Abigail Carter stayed, and the land was better for it.